Next week is my son's birthday, and I'd like to order a cake for 20 people, Emily said. Hearing this, I fell silent. 20 servings isn't a typical request, but she must have known I couldn't refuse. Understood, I muttered softly. Emily smirked unpleasantly, but I was determined to have the last laugh. I clenched my fists, resolute not to let her have her way. My name is Rothy. I'm a regular housewife who works part-time at a local supermarket. My only son, Nicholas, graduated from college and found a job at a nearby company. We are a happy family living together harmoniously. However, there's one unpleasant person at my part-time job, Emily. Emily's father, Christopher, is an executive at the supermarket. She transferred here from a different company about 2 years ago. Despite being a full-time employee hired mid-career, us part-timers, including me, have been here longer. From the beginning, Emily has been arrogant, ignoring advice and guidance. Both the staff and part-timers are at their wits' end. About a year ago, a part-timer named Rachel confronted her. Emily, even if your dad's an executive, you're just an employee here. We part-timers are your seniors. You should speak respectfully and listen to our advice. I thought Rachel was amazing for saying what no one else would. However, soon after, Rachel was transferred to a location too far for her to commute, forcing her to resign. Everyone thought it was Emily's doing, but nobody dared to say it out loud. Since then, no one has opposed her. The supermarket where I've worked for a long time is more than just a job. It's a cherished place where I belong. I often hang out with my part-time colleagues, and apart from Emily, we have good relationships. Then one day, as I continued to work, hoping for these happy days to last, something happened. Mom, I'm thinking of getting married, Nicholas announced. My husband Dylan and I were overjoyed. Truth be told, I always wanted a daughter to go shopping with, have tea with, and share a mother-daughter relationship. But after Nicholas, we weren't blessed with more children, so that dream remained unfulfilled. I hoped that by getting along with Nicholas's wife, I could build such a relationship. What's she like? I eagerly asked. Nicholas seemed happy. She's a very kind girl. Her parents seem well established, like she comes from a good family. I'm still a bit worried if I'm good enough for her. That's wonderful. I'm excited to meet her, I replied. Her name is Emily, Nicholas continued. He often talked about her, saying Emily this and Emily that. She apparently attends cooking classes and is good at cooking. She seems to like sweets too. Hearing Nicholas talk about her made me happy. A week after Nicholas's news on the weekend, she was coming over to meet us. She arranged it to match my day off. Not being as skilled in cooking to impress someone who excels at it, I ordered pizza and prepared a cake for that day. Dylan and I waited at home for Nicholas to bring her over. Then the long-awaited doorbell rang. She's here, I announced, feeling a mix of excitement and apprehension. I rushed from the living room to the front door. We're back. Emily, this is Mom, Nicholas said. As I turned to the woman beside him, I froze in shock. Nice to meet you, I'm Emily. Huh, Emily? Right before me stood Emily, the very source of my troubles at my part-time supermarket job. You know my mom? Nicholas asked. I had no idea Nicholas's mom was you. Emily seemed equally surprised. Come in for now, please, I said, still shaken, inviting them inside. Leaving me at the entrance, Nicholas led Emily to the living room. Hearing them talk with Dylan, I took a deep breath to calm myself. They had met at university. Emily is 2 years older than Nicholas. They were introduced by an acquaintance and reconnected about a year ago, eventually starting to date. I was surprised to learn your part-time job was at my workplace. You said you were in administration, so I thought you worked at a law office near the supermarket, Nicholas said, laughing nonchalantly, unaware of where his girlfriend worked. Indeed, Emily had graduated from law school and used to work at a law firm. Nicholas must have assumed she continued working at a law office and never asked explicitly. We chatted around the pizza, the conversation mingling with the unexpected reality of our new connection. I could only force a smile, unable to accept the reality and wishing it was just a dream. I'm truly surprised to think you're Rothy's son. I've been under your mom's care at work, Emily said, feigning innocence as if she treated us part-timers as anything but slaves. That's not true. I'm sure everyone's grateful for someone like you. Mom always says she enjoys her job and that there are nice people at the supermarket, Nicholas said. That's nice to hear, I replied, though I never intended to include Emily in that group of good people. Naturally, I couldn't say such a thing. so I stood up. I'll go prepare the dessert. Emily, would you like coffee or tea? I wanted to be alone, my heart racing. I needed to calm down quickly. I'll help, Emily, she said suddenly, standing up, an unusual gesture from her considering our part-time job. It's okay, you're a guest. Please sit down, I insisted, but Emily walked to the kitchen. Dylan and Nicholas watched with smiles, so I sighed quietly. However, Emily didn't miss a beat. It's really surprising to think you'll be my mother-in-law. Yes, that's right. It will be easier to get along. Looking forward to it. What did she mean by that? I had a bad feeling about those words, but I tried to keep her. Her smile was a sneer, always displaying contempt towards me at work. Just so you know, don't say anything unnecessary to Nicholas. Her words wiped the smile from my face. Emily knew. She knew she was disliked by us part-timers simply because I happened to be Nicholas's mom. She must have been planning to do whatever she wanted, using Christopher and Nicholas as shields. I turned pale, frightened by her, fearing she would destroy our happy days. Emily eventually left the kitchen without helping. That must have been her purpose for coming here. What about the preparation? Nicholas's voice interrupted. Emily replied curtly. I returned cheerily, not wanting to be in the way, so I came back. I told Nicholas, won't you reconsider the marriage? But my words would undoubtedly make my son dislike me. Don't interfere with Nicholas's marriage, even Dylan scolded me. So I just watched the two of them. Still, they seemed to have a good marriage, and Nicholas looked happy. A month after the marriage, I found out Emily was pregnant. Although it was complicated, I was also happy. Nicholas and Emily built a house next to ours, a separate household from Nicholas's. Dylan told me you should be a little more considerate, but knowing Emily's true nature, I wanted to avoid her. Still, I loved my grandson. His name was Ethan, a lively boy I rarely saw, but I looked forward to hearing his healthy cries. However, about 6 months after he was born, there was a day when his crying could be heard all day long. I finally rang the neighbor's doorbell. What is it? I said. Hello. Probably because I was the one who called out. Emily, who seemed to have been asleep, came to the door. Knowing it was me, I was worried because Ethan had been crying non-stop. Is everything okay? I simply stated the reason, but Emily looked annoyed. Are you saying I'm neglecting Ethan? She retorted sharply. No, that's not what I'm saying. I was just worried. If you're tired, I can wash him or help in any way, I hastily offered. But Emily didn't seem to hear. Dealing with modern kids is difficult, she muttered dismissively. In the end, I was turned away, and Ethan kept crying. A few days later, Emily came to our house with Ethan in her arms. Rafi, could you watch Ethan for a bit? She asked unexpectedly. Yes, of course, I replied, surprised by the sudden change in attitude. What's this about? I tried to understand the situation, but Emily left Ethan and his things at our house and departed. Oh, Ethan's here, Dylan noticed from the entrance, happily taking Ethan from my hands and heading to the living room. I followed Dylan, carrying Ethan's belongings. Since then, Emily started leaving Ethan with us frequently from morning till night. It was like running a daycare alongside my part-time job. Emily was on parental. I did agree to watch him, but there's a limit. I talked to Dylan and Nicholas about it, but they don't seem to take it seriously. Eventually, I had to take time off work or ask Dylan to watch Ethan briefly so I could rush to and from work. However, interfering too much and upsetting Emily would be troublesome. Despite the difficulty, I enjoy and cherish my time with Ethan. Dylan also looks forward to Ethan's daily visits. Busy but happy, the three of us spent enjoyable times together. Half a year later, Ethan's first birthday was approaching, and I was pondering what to give him as his first present. In the past, birthdays meant inviting relatives for celebrations, but there was no invitation from Nicholas or Emily. They must be planning a modest family celebration. While looking at my phone and thinking this, I received a call. It's Emily. What could it be? I answered the phone suspiciously, as Emily usually didn't contact me. Hello, Rafi. As you probably know, next week is my son's birthday, so I'd like a cake for 20. People were surprised by this sudden request. I was at a loss for words. What do you mean? I managed to ask. Just what I said. We're inviting relatives for a celebration, so I'm asking for the cake. I plan to serve a meal, so I can't manage the cake too. Plus, I thought I'd give you a chance to show off. Aren't I kind? Emily's words filled my mind with question marks. We weren't even invited to the celebration. and a cake for 20 people is not something a regular person would request. Emily's relatives, aunts, and uncles will be among the about 20 guests. Surely my employer at the supermarket and Emily's father-in-law, Christopher, will be there too, I thought, trying to make sense of the situation. I already told Dad that you will make the cake. It's a chance to show your good side. Who knows? You might get promoted to a full-time position, Emily said mockingly. I don't aspire to be a full-time employee, I replied quietly. As a part-timer, I shouldn't worry so much, but I couldn't forget Rachel, who was driven to resign. I told myself I must avoid being pushed into quitting. Emily's words are like knowing. I couldn't refuse, knowing she was exploiting my weakness. Cakes are easy. I'm more experienced in cooking, so I'll give advice, she said presumptuously, more than I had anticipated. Reluctantly, I agreed. All right, but with 20 people, maybe you should reconsider serving individual portions or using a large platter, I suggested. Ha? I'm the senior here. I'm not asking for advice. And what do you mean, okay? Can't you speak more respectfully? Emily retorted sharply. What kind of person is she? I held back my words, muttering quietly, understood. I could imagine Emily's smirking face on the other end of the phone, my frustration seeping through. She probably planned to ridicule me by presenting her perfect full course alongside my poor cake. But I wouldn't let that happen. I made a decision. Of course, Ethan was the star. I wanted to make his first birthday memorable, even though he wouldn't remember it. I started planning the cake design and went to a baking supply store for ingredients. Though I felt forced, I was also excited. Emily seemed annoyed by my amateur excitement. It won't amount to much. You should have asked me, the senior, for advice, she said when she came over to scoff. But I had no time for that. Later, Dylan and I were officially invited to the birthday. On the day, Dylan, with nothing else to do, left early for their house. It's too early, I said, but he was too excited. I sent him off with a smile and got up, ready to prepare. I muttered, checking the time, when the doorbell rang. Rothy, are you ready? Emily started entering without permission. She frowned upon seeing me relaxed. What, you were sitting? Where's the cake? I was about to start. Don't worry, I'll bring it on time, I assured her. It was only 8:00 a.m., 4 hours until everyone arrived, but Emily was shocked. An amateur can't make a cake for 20 people in 4 hours, she ranted. I've been preparing perfect dishes since 4:00 a.m. Don't ruin the event. Okay, I get it. It's Ethan's birthday. I wouldn't do that, I snapped back, making her frown even more. Just make sure to bring the cake by 12:00 p.m. She left, snorting. Was she bragging about finishing her part? I laughed at her frustration, doing nothing until the door closed. Then, I started. I brought the genoise from another room to the kitchen. A cake for 20 people can't be baked in a home oven, so I had borrowed a friend's oven to bake the large dough. I decorated it with prepared cream and fruits, made Ethan's favorite cars from cookie dough, and by 11:00 a.m., I was satisfied with the finished cake. I hurriedly finished and called Nicholas to safely transport the cake. I left it in a cool place and headed to the room where everyone was gathering, the largest room in Nicholas's house. They planned to eventually build a wall here to divide the room and turn it into a children's room. It was a good opportunity for such an event, as we hadn't celebrated the new house with relatives before. Ethan, unsettled by the crowd, was crying with Nicholas holding him. Everyone smiled at little Ethan's discomfort. Then Emily, with her mother-in-law Olivia's help, proudly brought in her dishes. Here's the appetizer assortment, she announced, placing small plates in front of each guest. The presentation was indeed beautiful and well-crafted. However, by the time she finished serving everyone, the first plates needed clearing. Ethan was still crying, and Emily and Olivia were busy. I stood to help, but Christopher said, "You should sit, Rothy. We're supposed to be the guests." Indeed, I agreed and sat back down, but the situation looked tough. I took Ethan from Nicholas and suggested he help Emily. As soon as I held Ethan, he became happy and started laughing. Everyone was charmed by this, but Emily looked displeased. She couldn't treat me like a pawn anymore, especially after hearing Christopher's earlier words. Christopher had been attentive, asking me about my job and Emily. I couldn't tell him everything, but our conversation brought up Rachel, who had been forced to resign. Did he really do that? He didn't seem like such a person. The dishes, served at intervals of 10 minutes each, were somehow completed. But judging by the relatives' reactions, it didn't seem they were fully satisfied. No matter how confident Emily was in her cooking, she should have considered serving family-style dishes given the guests and situation. All the dishes are served. Did everyone enjoy them? Emily said this with a happy expression. It seemed she was the most. Olivia next to her hadn't eaten anything and looked distressed, which was pitiable. Rothy has made Ethan's cake. It's ready, right? Emily turned to me. Yes, I'll bring it, I replied. I asked Nicholas for help and brought in the large cake. Emily's nieces and nephews gathered around the big box. Dylan held Ethan, who didn't show interest yet, but the adults were curious about the large cake box. Here it is. Nicholas and I opened the box. Cheers erupted at the sight of the cake we revealed. The children's genuine reactions were delightful, and I couldn't help but smile. The relatives were impressed, asking, "Did you really make this?" They took pictures. However, Emily, in a voice that cut through the calm atmosphere, exclaimed loudly, "What? You said you'd make it, not buy it. I want a unique cake for Ethan." She must have been tired and hungry. Her anger peaked with everyone's positive response to my cake. I did make it. Lies, you weren't doing anything this morning. The genoise was already baked, and the decoration was ready, Emily insisted, surprised. Genoise. It's a type of sponge cake. I've always called it that. I smiled at Emily. Ha, Christopher laughed. Then Dylan explained, actually, my wife used to be a pastry chef. I couldn't bake a cake for 20 people in our oven, so I asked a friend to borrow theirs and baked it yesterday. When I said that, Emily's face fell. She must have been upset, her plans having gone awry. It was fun to bake such a large cake after a long time. Thank you for the opportunity, Emily. Now, let's take pictures with Ethan and the cake, and then we can all enjoy it, I suggested. Seeing everyone's the most gratifying part was seeing everyone smile. Ethan, influenced by everyone's joy, smiled too. The group photo captured Emily's stained face amid everyone else beaming, a moment worth cherishing without any malice. While everyone enjoyed the cake, I held Ethan, who happily ate his own cake made of yogurt cream and banana pancakes. After seeing off the relatives and cleaning up with Olivia, I finally had a moment to relax. Ethan is really attached to you, Rothy, Olivia remarked, watching Ethan in my arms as we all took a coffee break. Nicholas responded, she always looks after him. I noticed Emily's stunned expression, but before she could react, Christopher intervened. What do you mean, always? Aren't you on parental leave? Christopher's question caught Emily off guard. Well, not always, just occasionally, like when I go to the hospital, Emily replied sheepishly. I gave a wry smile, unable to say anything. Nicholas realized his slip-up and looked uneasy. Christopher, noticing today's events and Emily's behavior, seemed contemplative. Don't lie, tell the truth, he demanded. Emily murmured in a small voice, I left him when I went out with friends. Christopher pressed further, is that all you burdened her with? You didn't know Rothy was a pastry chef, did you? Then why did you ask her to make such a big cake? Surely you were trying to be mean to her. Emily turned red and fell silent at Christopher's words, caught off guard. Nicholas was flustered. Apologize to Rothy, he said firmly to Emily. Tears welled up in Emily's eyes as she looked at me and murmured softly, I'm sorry. Christopher then politely bid farewell to Dylan and me. I'm sorry for the trouble my daughter caused, he said. It's all right, we understand you're busy, but please come to visit sometimes, we replied, seeing off their parents-in-law. Regarding Rachel, it seemed Christopher was not involved. Emily had persuaded the manager to transfer her after I inquired about it. Learning the truth, Christopher disciplined the manager and Emily had to resign at his behest. Christopher, angry at her for disgracing him, later visited the store where I worked to apologize. He indeed seems to be a responsible person. Since then, Emily has been respectful and no longer belittles people. She seems to genuinely care for Ethan. Nicholas, unaware of her previous coldness towards me, was disillusioned after learning everything. It was the first time he scolded Emily. Emily realized her mistakes and became much more subdued, as if she had changed as a person. She probably had been acting as she pleased, misusing Christopher's influence and thinking herself important. Being reprimanded by her father and husband at her age was a humbling experience. While I inwardly chuckled at this, I felt relieved. Looking at the photo from that day, I naturally continued my part-time job. There was no longer the needless burden of unexpectedly taking care of Ethan, so it didn't cause any issues with my shifts. I've been enjoying my time as usual, going out with my part-time colleagues. Emily's attitude has changed. She no longer behaves as before and has even asked me to teach her how to bake cakes. I was genuinely happy about this. While it's not the mother-daughter relationship I had dreamed of, I hope to gradually build a good relationship with my son's wife. I want us to become a family that celebrates and watches over Aiken's growth together.
My name is Elaine. I'm a 56-year-old doctor at our local hospital, a profession that has been both my calling and my refuge, especially since becoming a widow 2 decades ago. My life, outside of the hospital, revolves around my only son, Thomas, a 30-year-old who recently told me about his serious relationship with a girl named Clara. He described her in such glowing terms that I was both curious and eager to meet her. So, I invited them over for dinner. The day of their visit, I was a bundle of nerves. I wanted everything to be perfect. I prepared my signature dishes, a golden baked chicken, sweet milk pudding, and a hearty salad with chicken eggs, amongst others. I hoped these familiar comforts would make Clara feel welcome. When they arrived, Clara was noticeably thin and somewhat pale, but I brushed off my initial concern, attributing it to nerves, or perhaps a dietary choice I wasn't yet aware of. I greeted them warmly. "Welcome, Clara. It's so lovely to finally meet you," I said with a smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Elaine," Clara replied politely, though her voice was barely above a whisper. We settled in the living room for a bit before moving to the dining room. I could sense Thomas's excitement as he introduced Clara to my home. However, the atmosphere shifted drastically once we sat down for dinner. Clara's eyes widened in shock when she saw the baked chicken on the table. Her face contorted into a look of disgust as she exclaimed, "I can't believe you're serving this. I'm a hard vegetarian. I don't eat such things." Thomas turned beet red. "Mom, I'm so sorry, I should have told you about Clara's diet," he stammered. Clara cut in sharply, "Thomas, you're such a fool. How could you not mention something so important?" I was taken aback by her harsh words. It was uncomfortable to see Thomas being scolded like that. Quickly trying to remedy the situation, I offered, "Clara, I'm sorry about the misunderstanding. Perhaps you'd like to try some of the other dishes? Do they have any animal products? Eggs? Milk?" Clara interrogated, her tone accusatory. "Yes, they do," I replied, feeling a growing sense of unease. She slammed her hand on the table, pushing away the dishes. "I can't even stand the sight of them." Clara stood up abruptly and stormed out of the house, leaving Thomas to mutter an apology before running after her. Several months after the disastrous dinner, Thomas and Clara's wedding day arrived. Despite my reservations about Clara, I put on a brave face for my son's sake. The wedding, as I'd been forewarned, was entirely vegetarian. I had never been to a wedding like this before, and neither had most of our family. As I walked into the venue, I couldn't help but feel out of place. The decorations were beautiful, but the atmosphere was unfamiliar. Clara's friends, also vegetarians, mingled amongst themselves, discussing the virtues of their dietary choices. My sister, Martha, leaned over to me and whispered, "Elaine, have you seen the menu? I can't pronounce half of these dishes." I smiled wryly. "Just go with it, Martha. It's Thomas's day." The ceremony was lovely, but the reception was where things got interesting. The array of vegetarian dishes was certainly exotic. My relatives poked at their food with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. During the meal, my brother-in-law, George, a man never known for his tact, called a waiter over. "Excuse me, son, is there any chance we could get a steak or something? Just a small one?" The waiter, trying to remain polite, responded, "I'm sorry, sir. The menu is strictly vegetarian as per the couple's request." George grunted, "Well, I guess it's salad for dinner then." Despite the unfamiliar food, I tried to focus on the positive. Thomas looked genuinely happy, albeit a bit thinner than I remembered. As the evening progressed, I observed Clara. She was the center of attention among her friends, laughing and seeming in her element. Yet, there was an edge to her laughter, a sharpness that made me uneasy. A few days after the wedding, Thomas came to visit me alone. His appearance startled me. He had lost more weight and looked tired. "Thomas, are you all right? You've lost so much weight," I said, concern evident in my voice. He sighed, looking down at his hands. "Mom, Clara's been, well, she's put me on a strict vegetarian diet too. Says it's non-negotiable." I was taken aback. "But, Thomas, your job is physically demanding. You need a balanced diet." He shrugged helplessly. "I know, Mom, but I want to make her happy. It's been hard adjusting." I watched him leave later, feeling a mix of sadness and frustration. Clara's influence over him was more profound than I had feared. My son, once so vibrant and full of life, now seemed a shadow of his former self. After several sleepless nights, filled with worry about Thomas, I decided it was time to take action. I couldn't stand by and watch my son's health deteriorate. With a heavy heart, I picked up the phone to call Clara, Thomas's wife. I hoped that as a doctor, I could express my concerns in a way that would resonate with her. "Hello, Clara. It's Elaine, Thomas's mother. I hope I'm not calling at a bad time," I began, my voice as warm and friendly as I could muster. "What do you want, Elaine?" Clara's voice was cold, distant. "I'm calling about Thomas," I said cautiously. "I've noticed he's lost quite a bit of weight and seems very tired lately. I'm worried it could be related to his new diet." Clara let out a sigh, audibly annoyed. "Look, Elaine, Thomas is perfectly fine. He's just adapting to a healthier way of eating. You're overreacting." "I understand your perspective, Clara, but as a doctor, I see signs of nutritional deficiencies in Thomas. He works a physically demanding job, and a strict vegetarian diet without proper planning can lead to health issues," I explained, trying to keep the conversation civil and factual. "Elaine, I don't need a lecture on nutrition from you. We've done our research. Thomas is on a balanced vegetarian diet, and that's that." "You're not a dietitian," Clara retorted sharply. "But Clara, there are certain nutrients that are hard to get from a vegetarian diet alone, especially for someone with Thomas's lifestyle. Perhaps we could work together to find a diet that meets his nutritional needs and aligns with your dietary preferences?" I suggested, hoping for a compromise. Clara's voice rose in frustration. "I'm not interested in your help, Elaine. Thomas is my husband, and we make our decisions together. You need to respect that and stay out of it." Before I could respond, she hung up. I stared at the phone, feeling a mix of anger and helplessness. Clara's unwillingness to even consider my concerns was alarming. Later that day, my sister, Karen, came over. I shared the distressing phone call with her. "Karen, I don't know what to do. Clara just shut me down. She wouldn't even listen to my concerns about Thomas," I shared, my hands trembling slightly. Karen, always a source of practical advice, looked thoughtful. "Elaine, it's a tough situation. But maybe Thomas needs to come to this realization on his own. Clara obviously has a strong influence on him." I nodded, knowing she was right, yet feeling uneasy. I just can't sit back and watch Thomas suffer. He's always been a bit too accommodating, and now it's affecting his health. Karen reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "I know, Elaine. But sometimes stepping back is the only way they learn. Maybe when Thomas sees the toll it's taking on him, he'll make a change." A few days after my futile conversation with Clara, Thomas came to visit me unexpectedly. It was a cold, gray afternoon, the kind that made you want to stay indoors. When I opened the door, the sight of him took my breath away. He looked nothing like the son I knew. His face was drawn and pale, his eyes lacking their usual spark. But it was the scratches on his face that alarmed me the most. "Thomas, what happened to you?" I exclaimed, ushering him inside. He avoided my gaze, a sign that he was uncomfortable. "It's nothing, Mom, just a little argument with Clara." I led him to the living room, my mind racing with worry. "Argument? Thomas, she scratched your face. This is serious." He finally looked at me, his eyes weary. "I know, Mom. I don't know what to do anymore." I fetched my first aid kit and began treating his scratches gently. "Tell me what happened, Thomas. You know you can talk to me." He sighed, a deep, troubled sigh. "I went out for a quick bite. I just wanted to eat something more high-calorie and tasty, you know? I went to this cafe and ordered a burger. Clara saw me through the window. She stormed in and made a huge scene. I couldn't hide my shock. A scene? Over a burger?" Thomas nodded, looking down at his hands. "Yeah, she was screaming about me betraying our lifestyle, our values. She said I was poisoning myself. Then she scratched my face and told me to leave the house." I finished bandaging his face, feeling a mix of anger and helplessness. "Thomas, this isn't healthy. You can't live like this. Being forced to change your diet and then being attacked for eating a burger? It's not right." He leaned back on the sofa, closing his eyes. "I know, Mom. But I love her. I thought I could make this work." I sat beside him, my heart aching for my son. "Love shouldn't be this hard, Thomas. It shouldn't hurt like this." We sat in silence for a while, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the wall. Finally, Thomas spoke up. "I think I'll stay here tonight, if that's okay. I just need some time to think." "Of course, you can stay as long as you need," I replied, trying to offer him a comforting smile. That evening, as I cooked dinner, I kept glancing at Thomas, who was sitting at the kitchen table, lost in thought. I prepared a simple, hearty meal: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and steamed vegetables. The kind of food I knew he loved. As we ate, I tried to lighten the mood. "Remember when you were a kid, and you wouldn't eat anything but chicken nuggets for a week?" Thomas managed a small smile. "Yeah, I was a picky eater. But I always loved your cooking, Mom." I reached across the table, squeezing his hand. "You're always welcome here, Thomas. You're my son, and I just want you to be happy and healthy." He squeezed back, a glimmer of the old Thomas in his eyes. "Thanks, Mom. I really needed this." The next couple of weeks passed in a blur of worry and sleepless nights. Then, one ordinary Thursday, my world was rocked by a phone call that every parent dreads. It was the hospital. "Mrs. Parker, your son Thomas was brought in this morning. He's been in an accident," the voice on the other end said, calm yet impersonal. My heart skipped a beat. "Is he all right? What happened?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "He's stable now, but he lost consciousness at the wheel. He's lucky, the injuries aren't serious. You can come and see him," the caller replied. I hurried to the hospital, my mind racing with 1,000 fears. When I arrived, I saw Thomas lying in a hospital bed, looking even more pale and thin than before. "Thomas, oh my God, are you all right?" I gasped, rushing to his side. He managed a weak smile. "I'm okay, Mom. Just a bit shaken up." A doctor I knew, Dr. Simmons, came into the room. "Elaine, we've given him a thorough checkup. Physically, he's fine, just a few bruises. But his blood tests show signs of malnourishment. It seems he fainted due to low blood sugar." I turned to Thomas, my worry turning into anger. "Malnourishment? Thomas, is this because of your diet?" Thomas avoided my gaze, nodding slightly. I guess I haven't been eating properly. Clara's been so strict about the diet. I turned to Dr. Simmons. Can we make sure he gets a proper meal here? Something substantial? Of course, Elaine. We'll take care of him, Dr. Simmons assured me. I sat by Thomas's bed, holding his hand. Thomas, this has to stop. You could have been killed. All because of this diet. Thomas sighed, a look of resignation on his face. I know, Mom. I just wanted to make Clara happy. But not at the cost of your health, Thomas. This isn't just about food, it's about control. She can't dictate what you eat to this extent, I said, my voice firm but filled with concern. He looked away, his eyes filling with tears. I love her, Mom. I thought love was about compromises. Compromises, yes. But not like this. Not when it puts you in danger, I replied, squeezing his hand. We sat in silence for a while, the beeping of the heart monitor the only sound in the room. Thomas eventually drifted off to sleep, exhausted from the ordeal. I tried to call Clara, but she didn't answer the phone. Maybe she was afraid of my reaction to what had happened, or maybe she didn't care. After Thomas was discharged from the hospital, I insisted he stay with me for a while. Clara didn't mind. At least she didn't reply to my message. Thomas needed proper care, and I wanted to make sure he got back on his feet, both physically and emotionally. The first evening at my house, I prepared a hearty meal. As I set the table, I could see Thomas eyeing the food with a mix of hunger and hesitation. Mom, this looks amazing, but I don't know if I should. Clara might not like it, Thomas said, a troubled look crossing his face. Thomas, right now, you need to focus on your health. Clara isn't here, and you need to eat, I responded firmly, serving him a generous portion of roasted chicken and vegetables. He reluctantly began to eat, and with each bite, I saw a bit of color return to his cheeks. This is really good, Mom. I didn't realize how much I missed her cooking. I sat across from him, watching him eat. Thomas, you've always been healthy. It's painful to see you like this. Your relationship with Clara, it's not just about food. It's about control and your well-being. Thomas set his fork down, his expression pained. I know, Mom. I just don't know what to do. I love her, but everything is so complicated now. Love shouldn't make you compromise your health or who you are. You've always been considerate and caring, but you can't set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm, I said, hoping my words would resonate with him. Over the next few days, I took care of Thomas, ensuring he ate well and rested. We talked a lot, about everything and nothing. I avoided pressing him about Clara, hoping he would come to his own conclusions. One evening, as we were sitting in the living room, Thomas spoke up. Mom, I've been thinking a lot. Maybe I've been trying too hard to please Clara, losing myself in the process. I nodded. It's important to find a balance, Thomas. In a relationship, both people should feel valued and respected. He looked at me, a newfound determination in his eyes. I'm going to talk to Clara. I need to be honest about how I feel, about the diet, and everything else. I reached over, squeezing his hand. Whatever you decide, Thomas, I'm here for you. Just remember, your health and happiness are what's most important. As Thomas went to bed that night, I felt a mix of hope and apprehension. He was at a crossroads, and the next steps he took would shape his future. All I could do was support him and hope that he found the strength to make the right decisions for himself. The situation escalated quickly when Clara, Thomas's wife, burst into my house during lunch. Thomas was just starting to look a bit better after days of proper nutrition at my place. Thomas, what are you doing? Clara shrieked as she saw him eating the chicken broth I'd made. Thomas looked up, startled. Clara, I'm just... You're betraying our lifestyle again. I can't believe this. Clara was livid, her eyes blazing with anger. Before I could intervene, she knocked the bowl of broth from Thomas's hands, sending it crashing to the floor. I stood up, my own anger rising at her irrational behavior. "Clara, that's enough. You're in my house, and I won't tolerate this behavior," I said firmly. "You're poisoning him, Elaine, with your meat and your old-fashioned ideas," Clara shouted, turning her wrath towards me. Thomas tried to calm her down. "Clara, please, let's just talk about this." Ignoring him, Clara pulled out her phone. "I'm calling the police. I won't let you harm him any further." Thomas and I exchanged a look of disbelief as Clara dialed. Within minutes, a police car pulled up outside, and 2 officers came to the door. "What seems to be the problem here?" one of the officers asked, looking between Clara, Thomas, and me. Clara immediately began, pointing a finger at me. "She's been forcing my husband to eat meat. She's trying to poison him against his will." The officer turned to me, his expression one of mild confusion and concern. "Ma'am, is this true?" I shook my head. "No, officer. I'm Thomas's mother, and I've been taking care of him. He's been unwell due to malnutrition. I'm a doctor, and I was just trying to help him recover." Thomas spoke up, his voice weak but steady. "It's true, officers. I've been staying with my mom for a few days to get my health back." I went to my kitchen counter and picked up a hospital report. Here's the report from when Thomas was admitted after fainting due to low blood sugar. His diet was insufficient, and that's what I've been trying to address. The officers took the report, glancing over it. Clara's face turned pale as the reality of the situation started to dawn on her. "Ma'am, it looks like Mrs. Parker has been acting in her son's best interest," the officer said to Clara. "If there's no actual harm or criminal activity here, we can't take any action." Clara was speechless, her earlier fury deflated. The officers advised her to resolve the matter peacefully and left. Thomas looked exhausted by the whole ordeal. "Clara, I think you should go. We need to talk, but not now. Not like this." Clara, still in shock, quietly left the house without another word. I watched her go, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. The whole situation had spiraled out of control, and I worried about what this meant for Thomas's future with Clara. In the weeks that followed the police intervention, Thomas stayed with me, slowly regaining his strength and clarity of mind. We had many long conversations about his marriage and future. One evening, as we sat in the living room, a sense of resolve seemed to settle over him. "Mom, I've made a decision," Thomas said, his voice more assertive than I'd heard in a long time. I looked at him, feeling a mix of apprehension and relief. "What have you decided, Thomas?" "I can't go on like this with Clara. Our marriage, it's not healthy. I'm going to file for a divorce," he declared, though I could see the pain in his eyes. I reached out, taking his hand. "I know this must be hard for you, but I think you're making the right choice. You deserve to be happy and healthy, Thomas." He nodded, a sad smile on his lips. "I know. I just wish it didn't have to come to this." The next few days were a whirlwind as Thomas set the divorce process in motion. It was a tough time, but he handled it with a strength that made me proud. When the day came for him to move back into his own place, I helped him pack his things. As he was about to leave, he turned to me. "Mom, I can't thank you enough. You've been my rock through all of this." I hugged him tightly. "You're my son. I'll always be here for you, no matter what." A couple of weeks after Thomas moved out, I received a call from him. He sounded different, more like his old self. "Mom, I wanted to tell you that the divorce has been finalized. And I decided to take legal action against Clara for her role in the accident." I was surprised. "That's a big step, Thomas. Are you sure about this?" "Yes, I am. It's not just about me. It's about setting things right. And, The court ruled in my favor. Clara has to pay me compensation, he explained. I could hear the confidence in his voice. I'm proud of you, Thomas. You're standing up for yourself. There was a pause before he spoke again. I've also started seeing a counselor. I think it's helping me understand a lot about myself and my relationships. Hearing this brought a sense of peace to my heart. That's wonderful, Thomas. Taking care of your mental health is just as important. As we ended the call, I felt a wave of emotions. The past months had been a roller coaster, but through it all, Thomas had found his way back to himself. He had faced his challenges head-on and emerged stronger. The future was uncertain, but I knew that whatever it held, Thomas was now better equipped to face it. And as for me, I would continue to be there for him, his steadfast support, as I had always been. Hey there. I'm Clara, and I've been on a roller coaster that I used to call my marriage for the near 2 decades. I know numbers, that's my game, I'm an economist. But I'll let you in on a secret, give me a drab room and a fresh lick of paint and I'll give you a masterpiece. That's where I really shine. Now, Tom, he's a whole different story. The guy's got brains, I'll give him that. Financial analyst, and a damn good one. We met back in college, both of us bright-eyed with textbooks in hand. Dreamt of the big family, the white picket fence, the whole shebang. Turns out, life had other plans. Docs gave us the hard truth, with me, babies just weren't going to happen. Crushed us for a while, yeah, but we bounced back, sorta. We decided, if not a house filled with kids' laughter, we'd fill it with something else, style, charm, call it what you will. We found this house, and signed up for a multi-year mortgage. A beast of a place, years upon years on its bones, creaking like an old ship. Most would have walked away, but not us, we saw what it could be. I remember walking through the door the first time, the smell of dust and forgotten times in the air. Tom was right alongside me, and he was talking big plans, like he did. You see this, Clara? This place is ours. A bit of elbow grease, and we'll make it into something. I laughed, shaking my head at his excitement. Elbow grease? Tom, this place will take more than that. But we'll do it. Room by room. The first couple of years were rough. Juggling jobs and paintbrushes, learning how to fix a pipe without flooding the kitchen. But every evening, we sat amid the chaos of renovation, beers in hand, and it felt like we were invincible. One night, in the middle of an argument about what color the living room should be, he wanted blue, I wanted green, he threw his hands up and cussed. Damn it, Clara, pick whichever. It's just a color. I shot back, just a color? Tom, this is important. It sets the whole mood of the house. I was half mad, half laughing, because who gets into a tiff over paint? The green one, by the way. He said it made my eyes look brighter, and that was that. Every choice, every little victory was ours. Then the house started taking shape, and I got a taste for it, really got a taste for it. The neighbors, friends, they couldn't stop yapping about how I turned the old wreck into something out of a magazine. Each room was a new project, a challenge that I chewed on until it was just right. The transformation wasn't just the house, it was me too. Here I was, sleeves rolled up, covered in paint splatters, fiercer than I ever felt pushing papers at my old economics gig. Holy mackerel, Clara, did you redo the bathroom again? Tom asked one evening, eyebrows raised higher than the new shower head. Yep, didn't like the first tiles we picked. These are better, see? I slapped the wall, proud as hell. He leaned in, squinting at the tiles. Looks the same to me, but if it makes you happy, then I'm all for it. Typical Tom, always played it cool, but I knew he was impressed. When the Lewis family from next door came over for dinner, Mrs. Lewis almost dropped her casserole walking into the dining room. I had to stifle a laugh. I'm sorry, Clara, but this is just... It's gorgeous. You did this? She was all wide-eyed, turning in circles, taking it all in. I shrugged, trying to act like it was no big deal, but inside I was buzzing. Yeah, I did. Got sick of the wallpaper and thought I'd try something new. New? This is a dang masterpiece. Mr. Lewis chimed in, his face all grins. That's it, I'm done with beige. Mrs. Lewis declared, like she was about to start a revolution. The compliments were one thing, but the kicker? When people started asking if I'd take a look at their places, offer some advice. Then one lady, bless her, asked what I'd charge for a full room makeover. That's when the light bulb went off. Tom, I'm going to do it. I'm going to make a go at this design thing full-time, I said that night, my head full of dreams and schemes. Tom looked up from his paper. Full-time, huh? You sure you're ready for that? I clenched my jaw but kept my cool. I've never been more sure of anything. Well, then you better get to it. No sense in waiting around, he said, and went back to his reading. Not exactly a parade in my honor, but Tom was never one for big displays. He didn't say much while I set up shop, turned the spare bedroom into my office. He'd pass by the door, give a little nod if he caught my eye. Transformed the tangled mess of our yard into a garden people stopped to admire. I'd see him out there, leaning on the fence talking with passers-by about the flowers and the shrubs like he knew what he was talking about. One afternoon he came back inside, shaking his head. Some guy out there just offered me $50 to talk to his wife about doing up their yard. Can you believe that? I grinned, leaning back in my chair. We're a hot commodity, what can I say? With every chair I reupholstered and every light fixture I swapped out, my confidence surged. It was real work, getting your hands dirty, making things beautiful. And people paid for it, who would have thought? The hardest part was the learning curve, hanging drywall and not have it look like a dog's breakfast or figuring out plumbing without creating an indoor pool. But it was a good hard, you know? Satisfying. I finally felt like I was in the driver's seat of my own life, taking control and steering myself towards something that was mine and mine alone. Our house, with its fresh coat of me on every wall, every floorboard, it wasn't just a bunch of projects anymore. It was a signpost, pointing me to where I needed to go. Things were getting busier by the day, my phone was constantly buzzing with new clients, and my schedule was a jigsaw puzzle I was somehow supposed to piece together. Tom had been supportive of my work, but something had shifted lately. As my plate piled up, his seemed to empty, chores and all. "Mornin'," I greeted Tom, as I trudged into the kitchen, stepping over a pile of his work shirts. He grunted back, eyes glued to his laptop. At least he used to help with breakfast. "The basket's overflowing, Tom. Your turn, yeah?" I hinted, nudging the basket with my foot so it spilled onto the floor, hoping he'd take the hint. He sighed, not looking up. "Why? You're home all day." I stopped in my tracks. "Say what now?" "Look, you're always here," Tom continued, a little more carefully now, like he sensed the storm brewing. "Makes sense for you to handle the house stuff." "Handle the house stuff?" I repeated, my voice edged with disbelief. "I'm running a business, not sitting around here twiddling my thumbs." Tom's gaze finally broke from his screen. "Yeah, but I have to get to the office." I was about to argue, but the phone rang. Saved by the bell, or cursed, given it was another job to add to the pile. As the days rolled on, the pattern held. Tom's leave-behinds, coffee cups in the living room, newspapers scattered on the dining table, and those darn socks everywhere. You'd think he was trying to mark his territory. "Come on, Tom, this isn't the you I know," I said one Saturday morning, dishes clanking as I loaded the dishwasher with last night's remnants. "You used to care about this stuff." We were like two ships in the night, and I ain't talking about the romantic kind. He was off first thing, back when I was hip-deep in swatches and samples, and by the time he rolled back in, I was dead to the world on the couch, tablet still in hand. "Listen, Tom, we can't go on like this. I said one evening, dishes done, with enough energy left over to tackle what was really bothering me. "We're supposed to be a team." He looked like a teenager caught out past curfew. "Look, Clara, I just don't see the problem." I laughed, but it wasn't the happy kind. "You don't see? Okay. How about we start with you acting like this place is a hotel and I'm the service?" He opened his mouth, then shut it, like the right words had taken a detour. "I'm not asking for much. Just do your share. Act like you live here. Because, spoiler alert, you do." Tom ran a hand through his hair, looking like he wished he could disappear into the couch cushions. "Fine, I'll pick up the slack." "And?" I pressed. "And I'll start by sorting the laundry." "Now we're talking." I nodded, my arms crossed, but my lips trying not to smile, because it was either that or scream. It was a small victory, but I take M where I can get M. It was a reminder that for all the work, all the late nights and color palettes and textures and fittings, if your foundation is shaky, the whole house feels it. And I wasn't just talking about the renovations. I started noticing Tom was glued to his phone more these days. Eyes almost stuck to the screen. And then there was that haircut, the kind young folks are wearing, shaved on the sides and longer on top. When I asked him about it, he just shrugged it off, saying something about wanting a change. To me, it screamed midlife crisis loud and clear. It was finally the day we'd been plowing towards for what felt like forever. The mortgage was paid off. That was supposed to be our light at the end of the tunnel, our big reason to celebrate. So, on my way back from work, I dropped by the liquor store and picked up a bottle of the good stuff, the type that would make your wallet weep. I also got fancy cheeses, the sort with names too difficult to pronounce, and those artisan crackers that Tom liked. I was all set to surprise him. Walking into the house, everything was too quiet. Usually, Tom would be home by now, dinner on the go or some music playing. Not today. The place was dead silent. I called out for him, my voice disappearing into the silence. "Tom, you here?" "Nothing." I wasn't too worried at first. He could have stepped out for something, I thought. Maybe he went to get flowers, to add to the celebration, I hoped. I made my way to the living room and started getting the place ready for when he'd return. It was going to be a good night. We'd earned it. The expensive red would breathe a little, I'd get the snacks looking nice on plates, and we'd cheers to no more damn bank payments. But then I saw them, papers neatly stacked on the coffee table. Not thinking much of it, I reached over and that's when my heart took the first hit. Divorce papers with Tom's name already scribbled at the bottom in his unmistakable handwriting. For a good few minutes, all I could do was stand there. It felt like one of those prank shows where the joke's gone too far. But this was no joke. The realization sank its claws into me, and I could feel my hands shaking, my face hot. Damn it, Tom, what the hell is this? But I was talking to an empty house. I chucked the bottle of wine onto the couch, who cares if it stains, and sat down hard at the coffee table. This wasn't something you slip into conversation, this was a bang, it's over, out of nowhere slap in the face. I tried calling him. It just rang and rang before his voicemail casually invited me to leave a message. So I sat there for hours, waiting for him to walk through the door. I kept picking up my phone, checking if there were any missed calls, any texts. Nothing. It was like he'd vanished into thin air. The snacks lay forgotten and the bottle of red sat there, the unopened symbol of what was supposed to be our celebration. I remember when we bought this house. We thought this was it, we were set. But now there were just divorce papers and silence. And with every minute he didn't show up, didn't call, it was becoming crystal clear that he wanted out. But he couldn't even tell me to my face. Couldn't even give me a crappy excuse. Tom didn't come, and he didn't call. And I was left alone with a bunch of papers I never wanted, telling a story I didn't sign up for. When Tom walked in the next day, he wasn't alone. There she was, some young girl, looking at me like I'm yesterday's news. But this house, our house, she was eyeing it like it was hers already. "Oh, I wouldn't change a thing," she said as she flounced from room to room. "Except maybe the paint in the living room, brighten things up a bit. Don't you think it's a bit stuffy in here?" Her words, like she's marking her territory. Tom followed her like a lost puppy, then turned to me, "Brazen as you like. We will live here, Clara. In this house. With my new wife." I felt the anger boiling up inside, but I caught a look in his eyes, or maybe it was hers, and just like that, an idea sparked in my head. "Is that so?" I finally said, schooled my features into something calm, too calm. She pranced back in, still taking it all in, claiming it with her greedy little eyes. "Yes," she purred, "it'll do just fine." And then she looks at me like I'm some sort of bug under her shoe. But I'm not. I am the bug that knows where the dirt's hidden, knows exactly what to do when the time's right. I watched them, like a hawk eyeing its prey. Tom, he's talking numbers and moving dates, but I ain't listening. I'm plotting, thinking of every little way I could turn this back on them. Finally, I just smiled at them both. It wasn't a happy smile, but that's not what this was about. This was about wait and see, about holding your cards close to your chest. So I nodded. "All right then." Tom paused, probably expected me to yell or throw something. But no, I'm playing this smarter. "All right," he echoed, confused, searching my face for the catch. "Yeah, all right. You two lovebirds deserve each other." The girl beamed, clueless, thinking she's got it made. And Tom, he had this look, like maybe he's dodged a bullet. But really, he's just fired the starting gun. I turned away to hide the grin spreading across my face. They think they've won, got it all figured out. But little do they know, I've got plans of my own. The game's just begun, and I'm about to make my move. I sat across from Tom at the kitchen table, a bunch of papers spread out between us. "Let's make this quick," I said, tapping my fingers on the tabletop. "I want my $200,000, what I put into the mortgage. I'm taking my stuff, and that's that." He was half listening, his eyes drifting to where his girlfriend was hanging around like an eager puppy waiting for a treat. Yeah, sounds fair," he mumbled, not taking his gaze off her. A smile, cruel and all mine, lifted the corners of my mouth. And by my stuff, I mean everything I bought. All of it. "Sure, whatever." He was nodding along, not really caring or not realizing. Probably both. Tom's attention was all for the young thing, who was now stroking the back of the leather couch, one that I bought on a whim 3 years back because it looked classy and comfortable. We went down the inventory I'd prepared, point by point, and not once did he argue. Not when I claimed the flat-screen TV, not when I tallied up the kitchen gadgets, the high-end mixer, the chef's knives, the espresso machine that took me ages to pick out. With a distracted wave of his hand, he signed where I pointed on each paper. Signed our years away with less thought than he gave his fantasy football league. It took everything I had not to slam my fist on the table to get him to actually look at what he was giving up. But why bother? I was getting what I came for. And so, it was done. We signed our names, cleared the path for new beginnings, or in his case, a shiny new mistake. While Tom wandered out of the room, probably to chase his giggling girlfriend, I stayed put, relishing the weightlessness of ending it all. I heard her before I saw her, her voice like tinkling glass, all fake and pretty. She came into the kitchen, one-eyed turned from a 70s nightmare into a modern foodie paradise, and she ran her fingers along the granite countertops. He never cooked a thing in his life, I thought, and she probably can't boil water. "You're old, but you have good taste," she said to me, a backhanded compliment wrapped in a sweet tone that didn't reach her eyes. I looked her up and down, my gaze pointed. "Honey, good taste doesn't have an expiration date. But let's see how long your novelty lasts around here." And with that, I grabbed the box filled with photo albums, my favorite coffee mug, and a collection of fridge magnets from every state I'd visited and walked out without a backward glance. I didn't need to look back to know she was still standing there, probably puzzled by my refusal to fight. Good taste indeed. Let her find out, like I did, that marble and leather mean nothing without someone real to share it with. I had my memories, my dignity, and soon enough, a bank account that would turn that house into a distant memory. Moving day had all the drama of a bad TV show. Tom just stood there, mouth hanging open, as the movers made trip after trip out the door. Couch, gone. The fancy heaters I'd haggled for, gone. And yeah, when I said everything, I meant the kitchen sink too. That was a masterpiece of stainless steel, and it was mine when I walked in. It was mine walking out. His girl, what's her face, she lost it. Standing there in designer heels on the hardwood floor, I picked out. This wasn't the deal, she hollered like she was calling the shots now. I leaned against the doorframe, every piece of paper with Tom's signature a shield. Deal was I take what's mine. That's it. Tom finally found his voice, a little wobbly but there. Clara, let's talk about this. There's gotta be. I cut him off with a wave of my hand. Talk? You signed, Tom. As clear as day. Everything I bought, I take. He ran a hand through his hair, the way he did when he realized he was in over his head. But the sink, Clara? Come on. I didn't budge. You should have read the list. Not my problem, you were too busy with her. I nodded towards his plaything, who was now scowling like a kid who'd been told Christmas was cancelled. But where are we gonna wash dishes now? She piped up, hands on her hips like she was in some sort of showdown. I couldn't help it, I laughed. Guess you'll figure it out, won't you? Tom paced now, a caged animal sort of look about him. Clara, we can't just. We need some of this stuff. How about the heaters? It's winter. I glanced at the wall where the heater used to be. Close work. Or hey, maybe you two can snuggle up for warmth. Clara. His voice cracked. Typical. Always loud when he was losing. We had an agreement, Tom. You agreed to 200 grand and for me to take my things. Well, I'm taking my things. That's fairness. That's getting what I'm owed. He went quiet, that defeated slump setting into his shoulders. His girl, she still didn't get it, feet stuck to the ground, her face twisted. This is total crap. I shrugged on my coat, the one I used to leave hanging on the hook, by the door. Your problems aren't my problems anymore, sweetie. I put on my sunglasses, grabbed my purse, and stepped out into the cold. The movers had the last few boxes ready to go, and I gave them the nod. Time to move on. Behind me, the door to the house stood open, letting out all the warmth. A pretty good metaphor, maybe, but I wasn't in the mood for poetry. I was in the mood for starting fresh. As I pulled away, I left them standing in an empty house that was once full of everything but love. Love they'd have to find on their own, without the comforts I'd brought into their lives. A month had flown by since the split, my new life slowly taking shape, when my phone buzzed with a number I knew too well. My ex, sounding all choked and lost, was on the line. I can't do this anymore, he groaned. I'm cooking, cleaning, it's all me, all day long. He told me how his young wife did squat, just flicked her thumbs on her phone screen or waltzed out with her pals. He was learning the hard way, juggling pots and pans, scrubbing toilets, and handling laundry. Please, can we try again? I made a mistake, he was practically begging, that note in his voice, like he'd never known a day's work in his life. I held the phone, a smile cracking across my face. You've got some nerve, I chuckled into the receiver. But you made your bed, now lie in it. Hanging up felt like dropping the heaviest bag I'd been carrying without knowing. Released from that old deadweight, I threw myself into my latest project, my very own house. Yeah, you heard that right, my house, not ours, not his, but my very own. As I stood in the entranceway, my new place was bustling with voices and footsteps. A blank canvas waiting for me to splash it with life. Hey lady, "Where do you want this box?" one of the movers called out, struggling under a carton labeled kitchen stuff. "Over there, by the counter," I directed, pointing him to the spot. The advance guard of my new abode was just me and a crew who didn't care about the past, just where to lug the next heavy thing. They'd drop a box, wipe their brows and ask where the next goes. A dance of starting anew. That night, with the boxes still piled high, it hit me, this wasn't just a new page, it was a whole other book. And I was going to fill it with wonders and blunders, scribbles, and scenes that made sense only to me. It's funny how you think you need someone to make a house a home. But all you really need is to surround yourself with things that make you, well, you. Starting over? Yeah, let's paint this town with my kind of life. Hi, I'm Marie. Mom and wife full-time, that's me. Paul, that's my husband, works the trading gig, and let's just say he's married to his job just as much as he is to me. Used to scribble down thoughts on books, reading between and beyond the lines, but these days I'm more about reading bedtime stories to our boy, Jack. Life threw some curveballs early on, lost my parents when I still needed them. That was rough. Then along came Paul, with a family in tow. His folks were the real deal, good people, you know. Took me in, no questions. Made me feel like I finally belonged somewhere again. Been with Paul for years now, since those college days when love seemed to be enough to fill any void. We settled into a rhythm, he at work and me taking care of everything else. But man, did that rhythm skip and stumble when Jack came into the picture. Paul changed, or maybe this was always him, just waiting for a reason to surface. He'd come home on a Friday night with a few too many drinks in him, loose-lipped and surly. "You gotta start shedding that weight, Marie," he'd snipe after slipping off his tie. "You barely fit in those jeans anymore." I'd be lying if I said it didn't hurt, but I told myself to brush it off, toughen up, maybe he'd cool down by morning. But mornings just brought hangovers and silence until the next round. The house became this place where I tiptoed, trying not to set Paul off. Jack, little trooper, he could feel it too, sticking close, watching his old man with wide, careful eyes. One particularly rough Friday, Paul came home and made a beeline for the fridge, crack open a cold one. I was on the floor with Jack, blocks scattered around. "Another day in paradise, huh?" Paul sneered, leaning against the counter. I forced a smile. Just the usual, you know, chasing after this little tornado. I ruffled Jack's hair, but my heart wasn't in it. Paul tossed his head back, downing half the bottle. "Maybe put some of that energy into a workout routine, eh?" I bit my tongue, counting to 10 in my head. "I'll look into it," was all I managed, shuffling Jack into his pile of toys, anything to escape the cutting edge in Paul's tone. But the weight wasn't just on my hips, it was on my chest, heavy, making it hard to breathe. I didn't know who I was in Paul's eyes anymore. I had finally shaken off those last stubborn pounds. It felt good, kind of. But Paul, well, he had a talent for finding flaws. My sweats and baggy tees were the new target. "Jesus, Marie, you dress like you're living at the gym. When was the last time you dressed up? Remember how you used to look?" There he was, leaning on the doorframe with that look that said everything his words didn't. I glanced down at my stretched-out mom life tee and yoga pants. "This is just practical, Paul. You want me all dolled up to do laundry and wrangle our son?" One corner of his mouth curled up like he had just made a successful trade. "I dunno, how about looking good for your husband? That used to matter." I sighed, rolling my eyes. "Well, unless my husband starts taking meetings at the playground or the grocery store, I think I'll stick with practical." He shook his head, chuckling without humor. "You used to care, Marie." His voice trailed off as he wandered back toward the living room, his disapproval hanging in the air like a bad smell. Then there was Jack, our boy, trying to navigate the shaky terrain between us. I was teaching him please and thank you, thinking manners mattered. Paul caught a bit of our lesson one afternoon and scoffed. Look at you, teaching him to be Mr. Manners. You want him to get trampled on? Manners are important, Paul. It's about respect, I said, trying to keep my voice even. Respect is earned, not politeness policed, he shot back. He needs to toughen up, not be some yes, please pushover. Then the whole freeloader thing started. One night, Paul came home, tie askew, looking like he had won and lost the same fight. Nice day? He asked, sarcasm heavy as he glanced around what I'd come to see as our minefield of a home. I put down Jack's toy and braced for what was coming. Just the same, dealing with tantrums and spills. How was work? Paul's laugh was short and sharp. Work? Oh, it was just dandy, supporting a parasite. My cheeks burned. Excuse me? My voice was a little too loud. Jack's eyes flitted from me to Paul, sensing the shift. A parasite, Marie. I work, you play house, he said, each word pointed and heavy. That's the thanks I get? I am raising our child, Paul. Your child. That's work. That's vital, I said, my voice rising now, too. Jack started fussing then, picking up on the tension. I swept him up into my arms, trying to shield him from the fallout. Paul had a knack for knowing when he'd pushed too far, and his next words were more measured. Marie, I go out there and deal with sharks all day. Come home, and what? I don't know, something different. I can't be your one-man show, Paul, I said softly, trying to defuse the bomb that our marriage had become. I'm here, juggling a million things for us, for Jack. We looked at each other then, really looked, and I wondered if he saw the plea in my eyes. The help me, back me up, be with me that I felt screaming inside. But he turned away, the finality of his silence telling me that no, he didn't see. He didn't want to. One day, the disrespect boiled over. Jack scrunched up his little face and called me a name, a real zinger. He got it from Paul. You're just a lazy bum, he had hurled at me, his tiny voice bitter and angry. I felt like I'd been slapped. What? Jack, no, you can't say that, I stumbled, shocked. He folded his arms, stubborn as his dad. Dad says it, so can I. That was the last straw. When Paul got home, I was waiting, steaming like a forgotten kettle. You know what your son called me today? I laid into him without waiting for an answer. Paul dropped his keys on the counter and chuckled, clearly not seeing the line had been crossed. What did he say? The truth? He tossed his words over his shoulder as he walked to the fridge, his casualness like acid on my skin. Is that funny to you? I was shouting now, my usual restraint snapped tight as a dry twig. Your son is calling me names. Paul leaned against the kitchen counter, beer in hand, a smirk blooming on his face. Oh, come on, Marie. Kid's gotta learn to stand his ground. I was staring at him, hands balled into fists. By disrespecting his mother? He shrugged, a lazy lift of his shoulders that sent me teetering on the edge. You're too soft on him. Look, he's getting some spine. Spine? My voice shot up another octave. He's learning to be just like you. Paul grinned and ruffled Jack's hair. Ain't that right, champ? I turned to Jack, who was looking at us with eyes that were too old for his face. Jack, listen to me. What you said to me this morning was wrong. You can't talk to people like that. Jack's chin jutted out, defiant and stubborn. But Dad. I don't care what Dad says, you listen to your mom. I cut him off, my heart thudding like a drum. I was desperate for him not to follow in Paul's footsteps. But Paul wasn't letting it go. The boy's gotta learn to speak up. World's not gonna hand him anything. You keep coddling him, he'll end up. I get it, all right? I get it. I cut him off, feeling the weight of his words like a physical thing on my chest. But there's a line. You don't get it, do you? Paul threw up his hands, that ugly smirk still there. Whatever, Marie. You make mountains out of molehills. I turned from him, that burning in my chest now a churning mess. This is not how I want our son to grow up. This disrespect ends now, it ends here. Paul just took a swig of his beer, and I knew, right then, my words were just bouncing off him. I looked at Jack, really looked at him. You apologize to me, now, I said, the power in my voice surprising even me. Jack's eyes darted between me and Paul, but he knew that tone. Sorry, Mom. The word was small, almost lost in the kitchen, but it was there, and it was a start. I moved closer to Jack, knelt down so I was eye level with him. Thank you. We treat each other with respect in this house, you got it? Paul snorted behind me, but I ignored him. Jack nodded, a hint of my boy peeking through that new sullen shadow he wore. It was a crack in the wall Paul was building around him, a crack, but also a starting point. I stood up, squared my shoulders. We're going to fix this, Jack. No more name-calling, no more disrespect. We're better than that. I took Jack's hand, and we left the room, leaving Paul and his smugness behind us. I stood there on the sidewalk, my phone shaking in my hand. It was one of those moments where your gut ties up in knots. There, across the street, Paul was laughing it up with some woman. Blonde, curvy, and looking at my husband like he was the last piece of chocolate in the box. My thumb pressed record before I even decided to. The walk home felt a million miles long. A part of me hoped it was a misunderstanding. But deep down, I knew. Back in our kitchen, I threw my keys on the counter. Paul was sitting there with a beer, like he always did, but today the sight of him made me sick. Without a word, I tossed my phone on the table in front of him, the video playing. Care to explain? Paul looked at the screen, his eyes going hard when he saw what was on it. He muted it, placed it calmly on the counter, and then looked straight at me. Yeah, she's beautiful, he said, his voice dripping venom. You used to be like that. I felt the slap of his words, my cheeks flaming with anger, my body tense. So, that's it, huh? You parade around town with some woman while I'm at home? Paul stood up, his chair scraping back against the tile. He was too close now, his voice low and mean. What, you stalking me now, Marie? Can't handle the fact that maybe there's more out there than what's inside these walls? I was reeling, feeling the pieces click together. Cut the crap, Paul. You're cheating. He didn't even flinch. You want to know why, he said, his chest puffing up. Because around her, I'm somebody. Not just the guy who pays the bills or the bad guy 'cause he ain't Mr. Rogers. So that's it? I edged back, feeling the counter dig into my hips. Your family's not enough for you? Paul snorted and grabbed his beer again. It stopped being enough a long time ago. Maybe if you'd have kept up with yourself, I wouldn't have to look elsewhere. The bile rattled in my throat. I'm not the one who promised till death do us part. His laugh was short and punched the air. Those are just words, Marie. They stopped meaning anything to you a long time ago. I should have been crying, but the tears wouldn't come. I was just empty and angry. I gave you everything, Paul. I gave you a son, I made a home for us. And this is how you repay me? He took a long drink, then leaned back against the counter. You gave me a home? Looks like a prison to me. Same old, every damn day. You think that's a life? We made vows, Paul. I shouted, my voice cracking. Yeah, and you broke them every day with your sweatpants and constant nagging. His face twisted into something ugly, something monstrous. That was the last thing he said before I walked out, my heart numb, anger seeping into every corner of my being. I was on edge the whole ride over to Paul's folks' place. It was gonna be nasty, but I had to lay it out for them. They needed to know who their son really was. His mom answered the door, with a happy smile. Marie, what brings you here at this hour? I just barreled past her. I gotta show you both something. Once his dad came in, I played them the video straight up. His mom gasped, her hand flying to cover her mouth. His dad, red-faced and looking like he'd rather be anywhere else, he barked at me, "Paul's gotta stop this nonsense now." And like that, all hell broke loose. That night back at our place, Paul kicked off as soon as I walked in. "You had to drag my parents into this, didn't ya?" His voice was loaded, ready to fire. "Yeah, well someone's got to," I shot back, my nerves steel. He was a storm brewing. With a step towards me, his hand raised, but he didn't get far. "You're bad." Jack's voice cut through, strong and braver than any of us. Paul stopped stone cold. Paul's hand dropped, and his mask slipped a second, shock in his eyes. But then he hardened up again, cold as steel. "I want you out," he said, spitting the words like they were sour. "Take the kid and go." So we went. With Jack's hand in mine, I didn't look back. Bags thrown in the back of the car, we headed for the city, miles of road unwinding like my thoughts. The luxury house was something else, my unexpected inheritance. 2 stories, white columns, and a porch you could throw a party on, all waiting in another city, away from everything that had gone wrong. None of my folks, not even a whisker of Paul or his clan, had ever set eyes on it. When we pulled up to this grand house, Jack's face pressed to the window, eyes as wide as the moon. "Is this a castle?" His voice was a whisper, almost lost in the vastness of it all. "Something like that," I said, a laugh escaping me for the first time in. I couldn't even remember. We stepped into that house, our new beginning. It was silent, save for the echo of our footsteps on the marble floors, bouncing off the high ceilings crowned with crystal chandeliers. The furniture was swanky, left behind by folks I wish had lasted a lifetime longer. I plopped down on a couch soft as clouds, and finally, Jack's laughter filled the rooms. The sound of it was more luxurious than anything else in this place. We explored room after room, Jack running ahead like he was leading a parade. Each new door opened to a room grander than the last. "I call the biggest one," he declared, claiming a bedroom that overlooked a garden already blooming with the promise of spring. Laying him down to bed that night, the day finally caught up with me. My eyes burned with the tiredness of it all, but looking around at the high ceilings, the gold trimming catching moonlight, I knew we were worlds away from where we started. Sitting there, in the quiet of a room too nice for today's shadows, I whispered into the darkness, "We made it, kiddo." Life in the big house slowly shed the shadows of the past. Jack's giggles filled the halls more than the echoes of old fears. Most days, it felt like we had always been there, just the two of us, in our new safe haven. The house, with its silent strength, was keeping the world at bay until the day Paul showed up, uninvited and unwelcome. He was at the door in a storm of anger. I opened it and there he was, looking like trouble had followed him around. "You can't just disappear with my son, Marie." I leaned against the door frame, unfazed. "He's my son too. And I didn't disappear. I moved on." Paul's scowl deepened. He glanced around, taking in the opulence of the place with wide, disbelieving eyes. "How can you afford this? I know you don't make this kind of dough." I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from smiling. "Well, turns out I had a little left over each month. Who knew?" He raised an eyebrow, a sly accusation in his gaze. "And I'm struggling to cover rent for that old place by myself. It's damn near impossible now that they jacked up the price." I shook my head. He always was good at playing the martyr. "That's not my problem anymore, Paul. I've been using my own savings to cover the gap in the rent for years. Savings that, thank God, I don't need to bleed dry for that house anymore." The greed in his eyes flared up like wildfire. "What, and you're living here in luxury while I—" "Stop right there," I cut in. "This isn't your concern. This," I motioned to the grand house behind me, "is mine. Mine and Jack's." Paul took a step forward, but I didn't back down. "Look, I came here to fix things. I'm saying I forgive you for all this, sneaking around." His audacity almost knocked the wind out of me, but I had a little surprise that would put the brakes on his charade. From behind the door, I pulled out the divorce papers and slapped them into his chest. And here's what I'm saying. We're done. He looked as if I'd slapped him with a physical hand, his face twisting through confusion, rage, and then settling on calculating desperation. You can't do this. What about Jack? I stood taller, my resolve like iron. I'm doing it for Jack. He doesn't need this chaos you bring. Sign the papers, Paul. It's over. He glanced from the papers to me, then back again, his posture deflating slightly. You'll regret this. You can't make it alone. That's where you're wrong. I smiled, not from humor but from a deep-seated confidence. I'm already making it. And without you, we're doing more than just fine. We're thriving. With a shake of his head, Paul looked like he wanted to say more, but he didn't. Instead, he turned on his heel and strode away, clutching the papers like they were a snake that could bite. Once he was gone, the house seemed to exhale with me. I closed the door gently, turning back to the life I had fought so hard for. Life had a way of tossing stuff at you, hard and fast. It was Thursday, the kind of day that should have been easy, but it wasn't. We shirked dinner for a bit, setting up ramps out of old books and watching the Lego car stupidly do flips and land upside down. Jack's laugh was infectious, the sort that wiped clean the worry lines off my face. His enthusiasm was a reminder that amid all the crap, there was still good, simple, unadulterated good. Then it came, a banging on the door that made my stomach drop and my face lose all its motherly warmth. Paul had a knack for bad timing and worse entrances. I pulled the door open and there he was, looking like he'd just come from a bar fight or lost a bet. Paul, what's up? He scowled, that usual look he gets when he thinks the world owes him. So, this the high life? You playing house with my Jack while I'm scraping pennies just to get by? Jack peeked from behind me, a knight in Lego armor. Hey, screw off, Paul. Don't talk to my mom like that. Paul's face turned a nice shade of tomato. The hell? You let him talk like that? I stood there, hands on hips. He's expressing himself. Something I should have done with you a long time ago. Jack came out from behind me, all fierce. Yeah, get lost. My mom, my rules. Paul's anger was something else, a storm that had nowhere to go. You think you're smart, huh? Talking to your old man like that. Jack squared his shoulders, a small David to Paul's Goliath. Don't gotta think. I know it. Mom knows it. Paul opened his mouth, but nothing came out. There was Jack, staring him down, waiting. This was no place for Paul anymore, no place for his bluster and noise. After a tense moment, Paul shook his head, muttered something under his breath and stormed off the porch. Jack turned to me with this look, the kind of look that said, "We got this." I nodded, all the agreement he needed. We went back to boiling pasta and racing Lego cars. That's how we do it, simple, nothing fancy. We just keep on. I was gabbing on the phone with Miss Dottie, Paul's mom, who was more my family than is now. Honey, you just holler if there's anything you need, 'kay? Her voice was always a warm blanket over the line. We're all good, Miss Dottie. Really, couldn't be better, I assured her, twisting the cord around my finger. She hummed a pleased note. Just makes my heart full to hear that. Keep on keeping on, you hear? Frank, her husband, yelled from somewhere behind her. Tell her that any time she wants to send over some of that lemon meringue, we won't complain. A genuine laugh burst out of me. Expect a pie on your doorstep soon, Frank. Exchanging a few more pleasantries, we hung up. I shook my head. If someone had told me last year I'd be mining gold from the wreckage of my married life, I would have laughed in their face. Jack pulled on my sleeve, waving his drawing like a 5-star general. Look, Mom. This is our house. I looked down. His scribbles had heart. A big square house and 2 stick figures, a little one and a tall one, with sloppy grins and a lopsided sun shining down. The swing I'd put up for him stood out in green and brown strokes. That's us, right? A dumb question, really, but it made him nod with pride. And I'm gonna sell my art, make us rich. There was serious conviction behind his toothy smile. If you do, you're buying me that fancy coffee I've been eyeing? I nudged him with a wink. He nodded, his expression all business. Only the best for my mom. And just like that, the knot in my chest loosened a bit more. Sundays were like that, full of little miracles. The thing was, life had done a real number on us, but it was looking up. Paul got slammed by the door he let hit him on his way out. The fancy house he rented to impress his mistress? Turned out to be a couple of sizes too big for his wallet. Now he was cooped up in a tiny apartment, the kind of place his pride wouldn't have let him consider a year ago. And the mistress? She hightailed it the minute his pockets turned up empty and his promises hollow. But that was a tale for some other time. Right now was about Jack and me, and the park we were marching to, hand in hand. We stepped out, and the door clicked shut, a soft full stop to one chapter before immediately kicking off the next. Jack tugged me towards the park, his excitement bubbling over. I didn't glance back at our home, no need. Ahead was everything that mattered, me and my boy, parts of a world that kept on spinning, even when you felt like you'd fallen off. I'm Goldie. Picture this, I'm 30, hitched to a solid guy, Alex. He's got the reins of this family gig, a trading company that's been in his bloodline since before I was even an idea. I land a gig there not long after we tie the knot, slinging deals as a sales agent. And guess what? Figures shot through the roof the minute I started. Alex gets a kick out of it, always cracks the same joke. Babe, you didn't just bring love, you hauled in the big bucks too. So, there's your fairy tale start, right? But life's got a funny way of throwing you curveballs. Now, Mary, the mother-in-law, she's a piece of work, you know? And Cynthia, her daughter, she prances around like she's Queen Bee because she's got some fancy letters behind her name. It's my first dinner at their place, and I'm all dolled up, trying to make a good impression. We're sitting there, around this table that's too big for any sort of cozy conversation, and the third degree starts. So, Goldie, Mary starts, peering at me like I'm some specimen under a microscope. Which college did you grace with your presence? I tell her straight, went to state. Got my degree and learned a ton about the real world. She snorts, and there's this moment, brief as a heartbeat, where I see Cynthia trying to hide her own sneer. State, Mary echoes, like it tastes bad just saying it. And Cynthia, oh, she jumps right in, smug as a cat in the cream. An MBA from Harvard on my end, she flaunts, leaning back with this smirk that got under my skin in a real quick minute. I'm not one to back down, so I shoot back, cool, but it's what you got up here. I tap my head. That matters, not where you sat on your butt getting it. Their chuckles go cold, but I don't give a toss. I'm not there to play doormat to their uptown attitudes. Dinner wraps up, and I'm thinking, okay, rocky start, but we can smooth this over, right? Wrong. Next thing I know, Alex is getting an earful from Mary about how Cynthia, the golden child, should join us at the company. And it ain't just any old job she's vying for, she's shotgunning straight for my department's top spot. Well, she has an MBA from Harvard, Alex. Mary presses, stating the obvious like it's some trump card. She's perfect for head of sales. And what's nuttier is Alex actually caves. Before I can even protest, it's a done deal. Cynthia waltzes in like she owns the place, and here I thought we were playing fair in love and war. From day one, she's throwing her weight around, lips curled in this permanent sneer every time our paths cross. I get it, lady, you think you're hot stuff. But around these parts, you gotta earn your stripes, not just show 'em. It wasn't so much what she said, it's what she did, or didn't do. You get me? It's the coffee she'd let go cold when an intern brought it to her, the sideways glances and snide digs at my expense, the way she'd talk shop as if she's got years on me. Alex sees it, I know he does, but what's he gonna do? It's his mom and sis firing at him with both barrels if he steps out of line. I land at work, and it's like walking into a storm. Cynthia's there, perched at her desk like she's the captain of a ship. But here's the kicker, she ain't sailing, she's sinking us, one bad decision at a time. Take last Tuesday. I'm in early, coffee in hand, trying to keep things afloat, and in struts Cynthia, dropping her purse with a thud that says, I'm in charge. She calls me into her office, right? Sits me down and starts in with this list of orders that'd choke a horse. Goldie, see these files? She waves some papers at me, scattered like confetti. Fix them. And I need it yesterday. I'm staring at this mess and thinking, lady, you've done lost your mind. But I bite my tongue, nod, and get to it. Fast forward a couple of hours, and I'm untangling her knots, right? That's when Mr. Jacobs calls. This guy's big league, think whales in a sea of fish. I can hear the tension a mile away. What's this crap Cynthia sent me, Goldie? He barks through the line. I asked for projections, not preschool scribbles. I'm juggling phones, trying to soothe him. Mr. Jacobs, I got this. Give me an hour. I hang up, track Cynthia down, and she's there painting her nails like she's at a spa. Cynthia, you gotta double check your work. Jacobs is ready to walk. She doesn't even glance up. Not my prob, Goldie. You handle it. So there I am, patching holes in a sinking ship while she's giving herself a manicure. I spend the whole day in damage control, but hey, I do love a challenge. And Jacobs? He's cool by the time we're done, thanks to yours truly. But it doesn't end there, oh no. You think she'd say thanks? As if. The next day, I catch wind of a meeting, right? Alex and Cynthia are at it, voices through the roof. I sidle up to the door, and who do I run into but Mary, listening in like it's the season finale of her favorite show. I'm about to step in, but she grips my arm, nails digging in like claws. Leave them, she hisses, all snake-like. This is family business. I wrench free, feeling her eyes on my back, and open the door. There's Cynthia, tears and all, playing up a storm. Alex, I'm trying, but Goldie's always undermining me. I'm floored. If her lies were dirt, we'd be buried alive. Alex is standing there, and I can see he's torn. He wants to believe his wife, but Sister Dearest is laying it on thick. I speak up. Alex, come on. You and I know that's a load of bull. Cynthia whips around, all drama. See? She points right at me, accusing like I'm the bad guy in some cheap novel. We're nose to nose, practically. You wanna explain, Jacobs, then? I challenge her, my voice level. Alex pipes up, tired lines around his eyes. Enough, both of you. I take a deep breath, ready to battle this out, but Mary barges in, cutting the air like a knife. Goldie's just jealous, Alex. You can see it. I'm about to say my piece, but it's like talking to a wall with those two, no, three. They've made up their minds, and I'm the villain in their fairy tale. It was a Tuesday, nothing out of the ordinary, until I got the call. Alex had a wreck. Some jerk ran a red and my world flipped upside down. The hospital, the blinking machines, Alex looking too still, it was like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I was in that hospital room, feeling like someone scooped out my insides. But here's the deal, which, trust me, made my heart sink even lower if that's possible. According to Alex's will, only a blood relative can take over the company. That should have been our kids, if we had any. Without them, it defaulted to his next of kin, which turned out to be his sister, Cynthia. So, just like that, I'm on the outside looking in. My husband isn't even cold, and already the wolves are circling. So while I'm drowning in grief, here come Mary and Cynthia, all pep and no sympathy, already divvying up the spoils before the battle's even done. Cynthia wastes no time throwing it in my face, right there in the hospital corridor. You see, Goldie, it's all clear-cut. Alex's will is as plain as day. Blood relatives only. With Alex. She trails off, like even saying coma would jinx her takeover. I could barely keep the snarl from my voice. So, what? You're dancing on his grave already? The man is fighting for his life." She just rolled her eyes, as cold as the sterile hospital walls. "Business waits for no one, dear. It's unfortunate, yes, but we must think of the future. And as for you," she stepped closer, "well, you were just the wife. As I see it, you were never really part of the company, not like family." Mary nodded, her lips in a thin line. "Cynthia's right. You have no children, Goldie. It was always going to be her." That was it. Their true colors, loud and clear. They didn't give a damn about Alex, only about what they could grab from his still warm hands. I walked away from them, my mind a chaos of grief and fury. I had to do something, but what? Every fiber of my being was woven into that company, into the life Alex and I had built. I wasn't just going to let them steal it. Days turned to weeks, and Alex didn't wake up. The company felt his absence like a missing limb, and Cynthia's reign didn't sit right with anyone. They all felt it too. One afternoon, Cynthia blocked my path by the copier, her arms folded over her chest. "Still here, Goldie? I'd have thought you'd take the hint and leave with some dignity." I locked eyes with her, my back ramrod straight. "Dignity? You wouldn't recognize it if it bit you. This isn't over, Cynthia." Her laugh was empty, but her eyes were sharp. "Oh, it's over. It was over the minute that will was drafted. Alex's beloved wife or not, you're nothing to this company. Better start looking for a new job." I bit the inside of my cheek, tasting blood. "We'll see." I turned on my heel and left her standing there. Her words were meant to cut deep, but they just fueled a fire in me. I wasn't about to roll over. The employees, they were with me, they knew where the heart of the company lay, and it wasn't with Cynthia. Day in and day out, I found myself in the same routine, pulling up a chair next to Alex's hospital bed after surviving another round of corporate warfare. The beep of the machines had become my unfortunate companion, the soundtrack to our one-sided conversations. Despite the coma, I'd tell Alex everything, hoping, praying he could hear me. "Alex, you won't believe the circus your company's turned into," I'd start, my voice a low murmur, laced with fatigue. "Your sister, she's taken over, bulldozed her way through the board, and camped out in your office like she's queen of the castle. She's axed Dan and Rita, just like that, because they wouldn't bow down. And the clients? They're jumping ship left and right. The Henderson deal, the one you worked months on, is dead in the water. They've had it with her." Each visit blurred into the next, the hospital walls absorbing my endless monologue, full of updates and frustrations. I'd scoff and curse, my tone growing bitter as I recounted the latest sabotage. "And let's not get started on your mom," I continued, the bitterness in my voice growing sharper. "She struts around the office now, tossing digs at me every chance she gets. When Alex wakes up, you're out, she sniped at me yesterday. As if I haven't poured my soul into this company too." I felt the sting of tears threatening to spill, talking to Alex's motionless form. My husband, the man who promised to tackle life's ups and downs with me, was silent, caught in an endless sleep. Yet, I clung to the sliver of hope that someday he'd crack open his eyes and we'd really talk. Then it happened, so unexpectedly it knocked the breath out of me. In the middle of a particularly tough rant about how his sister's latest stunt might be the downfall of the entire business, Alex's eyes flicked open. They found mine, and the corners of his lips turned up in what I knew was meant to be a reassuring grin. It was a bittersweet smile that didn't quite reach the old spark that used to dance in his eyes, but it was more than enough. "Alex, you're back? Can you hear me?" My voice cracked, a mix of joy and disbelief. Before I could let the moment get the better of me, his hand, stronger than I'd felt in ages, clasped mine, and he gave a near imperceptible shake of his head. It was a silent plea to keep this moment between us. "You sly dog," I said, a laugh bubbling out of me in relief. "We're keeping this our little secret then, huh?" His smile said it all as he closed his eyes again, like this was just a brief break from his rest. But that grip on my hand didn't let up. I leaned in close. Alright, Your Highness, we'll play it your way. We'll let them think nothing's changed. But you and me, we're gonna turn this around. Wait and see. Leaving the hospital that night felt different. There was something like hope, or was it defiance, brewing inside me. I'd go to the office tomorrow, face Cynthia and his mom, and act like it was all the same, all while knowing Alex was coming back to me. Days turned into weeks, holding in the secret like clenching a fist around a live wire. That wire jolted out of my hands the day I got called to the lion's den, or what used to be Alex's place before Cynthia turned it into a sort of throne room for her ego. I walked into that office, a storm brewing in my chest. Cynthia was perched on the edge of Alex's desk like she was waiting for a parade in her honor. Mary lounged in a corner, looking all smug. Time to hit the road, Cynthia tossed the words out without even looking directly at me. She had the termination papers already laid out like she was dealing cards at a shoddy casino. Mary piped up from her corner with that gravelly voice of hers, with Alex out of the picture, Cynthia's running the show. I was one twitch away from telling them where they could shove those papers, but I clenched my fists, instead, teeth grinding. And just like some Hollywood timing, the door swung open with a bang. There was Alex. He looked rough around the edges, but still standing, still breathing, still mine. Cynthia's face dropped like she just swallowed a bug. Alex didn't miss a beat. "Cynthia, get out of my chair." He spat the words out. His voice held less of its usual command, sure, but it had a bite. My eyes could barely peel away from him, but I had to see Cynthia's reaction. Her face twisted like she was chewing on glass. "What the, Alex? How are you?" Alex cut her off. "Standing? Talking? Surprise, sis. I'm not as gone as you hoped." Mary tried to back her daughter up. "This isn't happening. He's supposed to be drooling in a bed?" "Yeah, well, life's full of surprises." Alex snapped back, his eyes never leaving Cynthia. "Now, off my chair. We're going to have a real nice chat." Cynthia stood, stumbling a bit like her legs were made of wet noodles. "You can't just come back and what? Take back my company?" "Oh, I think I can," Alex interrupted, moving closer to his desk. I stepped forward, standing next to Alex. The two of us. United front. "Yeah, Cynthia." I pitched in. "Hurling people out on their asses is your specialty. Time to see how it feels, huh?" Cynthia clenched her jaw so tight I could hear her teeth grind, while Mary was still trying to process the scene, looking like her software crashed. "Alex, you're sick. I need my company back. You two," he waved a dismissive hand at them. "You're done here." Cynthia's face was now the color of rotten tomatoes. "I'll call the board. They won't stand for this." Alex looked over at me, a knowing glint in his eye. "The board's in on it, aren't they, babe?" I nodded, barely holding back a smile. "Yep. Heard from them this morning. They're thrilled you're back. Even sent flowers." Cynthia still tried to have the last word. "This isn't over, Alex." "No, it is. For you." Alex's words cut her off, as short and final as a door slam. Cynthia's eyes flitted between Alex and me, the defeat finally sinking in as she grabbed her mom's arm. They left, not with the whiff of victory but with tails between their legs. Then, it was just us, alone in the room that had seen more drama than a daytime soap. "You played it well, Alex. Had me scared too," I managed to say, my voice shaking off the last bits of worry and fear. He slumped into his chair, looked up at me with those eyes I fell for. Had to make it believable. Couldn't let them ruin everything we've built. I took his hand, a surge of pride washing over me. They didn't. And they won't. Alex's grip on my hand tightened, the fight still there. Time for some damage control. I shot back, more like a full-on fixer-upper. But together, we'll patch it up. Alex laughed, that familiar sound, but this time it was a little more victorious. I laughed too. It was over, this round at least. We were back in the game, Alex and I, ready to rebuild and face whatever came next. The office was humming like a kicked anthill when I walked in, fresh energy lighting up the place. With the dead weights cut off, Alex's office felt like a command center ready for a new mission. His recovery had flipped the switch on our future, and we were gunning the engine hard. I found Alex in the middle of the fray, barking orders to the team but with a grin that said he was back to his old self. "Okay, team, let's not waste any more time," he said. "We've got a whole chunk of backlog to clear and new deals to chase." I leaned against the doorframe, watching my husband rally the troops. He caught sight of me and winked. "Hey, you're part of this too, roll up your sleeves." Chuckling, I walked over. "Do I get a title for this or just the usual Alex's better half?" He chuckled. "How about co-captain?" Co-captain rang out well, so I nodded. "Co-captain, reporting for duty." Turning to the team, Alex made introductions. "Everyone, meet the co-captain of this ship. She steered it through the storm while I was out." The team clapped, and a few here's rolled through the group. It felt good, really good, like we were a family that had weathered the worst. As the team dispersed to get back to work, I sat down with Alex. "So, what's the game plan?" I asked, comfy in the swivel chair I had commandeered. "We're shaking the tree, babe, ditching the bad apples that Cynthia brought in." Alex sounded pumped. There were spreadsheets all over his desk, plans scribbled on paper. I pointed to the papers. "Hiring new blood?" "Yep. And we're putting money into developing our team. Training, seminars. No more throwing them in the deep end," he replied, highlighting a section that said team growth. I added, "Not just survival of the fittest, then." Alex shook his head. "Nah. It's about thriving, not just surviving." We both knew the buzz in the office was more than just people being busy. It was hope, rebooted and recharged. Then my phone buzzed. It was a message from Ted, our old supplier. "Hey, he's asking about the contracts. Should we bring him back in?" Alex paused for a moment. "Yeah, I think it's time. He was with us since the start. Let's not ditch loyalty." I nodded. "Loyalty pays. I'll draft up something nice and comfy." The word comfy had Alex grinning. He knew that meant terms good enough to lock Ted in tightly. Just as I was about to get up and get to it, Alex grabbed my hand. "Hey, I never got to say it properly, thank you. For not giving up when I was, well, you know." I squeezed his hand. "No need for thanks. It's us against the world, right?" "Right," he confirmed, and we locked eyes in a moment of silent understanding, the kind that said we were a team, through thick and thin. My phone vibrated. It was Cynthia, rambling on about another blown job interview. "They don't get it, you know? I'm leadership material, they want me to start from scratch." "No way." Alex overheard and shook his head. "She needs to start at the bottom, learn to crawl before she can boss around." I nodded. "Right. But try telling her that." Cynthia wasn't the only family headache. Alex's mom was a constant buzz in our background, mad about the money tap getting twisted shut. She called again, and Alex glanced at the phone, letting it ring out. "Your mom again?" I asked, already knowing the answer. He sighed. "Yep. She's been blowing up my phone since I stopped the cash flow." The memories of them assuming the worst when Alex was sick, bordering on vulture circling, stayed fresh. Alex finally picked up on the fifth ring, keeping it clipped. "Mom, it's done. You've got to deal with it." The line got real loud, real quick. His mother's voice shrilled through, but Alex held his ground. When the call ended, he was tired but firm. No more free rides. I wrapped an arm around him. "You okay?" He nodded. "Yeah, it's just draining." "Let's not let them spoil tonight, okay?" I suggested, wanting to steer clear of the drama for once. "Agreed. Besides," he said, "there's something better to talk about." His hint hung in the air, and I smiled. "A baby?" He smiled back, full of hope and love, his eyes lighting up at the possibility. Shifting gears from family drama to our own little unit felt like the right move. The notion of a kid, of starting fresh with our own small tribe, seemed to seal the deal on the new beginnings front. Turning off the lights, locking up the office that was once a battleground, we left for the day, hand in hand, a team thinking about adding a new member. Beneath the calm of making plans for the future, there's that undercurrent of family strain. But it's getting easier to let their calls go to voicemail, to ignore the bitter texts. We're not cold, just done. Done with the guilt trips, the scrambling to appease. It's about our little family now. And maybe, just maybe, this fresh start isn't just a new chapter in the business. Driving home, I sat with that thought, thumbing the little baby shoes we'd impulsively bought, a symbol of hope, of new life. So, about baby names, Alex started. I smothered a laugh. Already? He shrugged. Never too early. The streetlights flickered past, each one a beacon in the easy silence of our drive, each one guiding us away from the chaos and towards something better.
Life has a funny way of throwing surprises at you. I'm Hannah, a 25-year-old woman who learned this lesson in the most unexpected place, a bustling coffee shop on a busy Tuesday morning. That day, my life took a turn when I crossed paths with Chris, a man who seemed to step right out of a story of everyday heroism. The coffee shop was my sanctuary, a place away from the high expectations of my wealthy family. I sat at my usual corner table, sipping a latte and scrolling through my phone, when I heard snickers behind me. It was the Johnson twins, notorious bullies from my college days. "Look who's here, all alone. Daddy's little girl," sneered Mark, the taller of the two. I tried to ignore them, focusing on my phone, but they weren't done. "I bet that purse costs more than our rent," added Matt, his voice dripping with mockery. Feeling my cheeks burn, I muttered under my breath, "Just leave me alone." That's when Chris, who until that moment was just another customer, stepped in. He was tall, with a rugged look and a confident stance. "Guys, cut it out. She's not bothering you," Chris said, his voice calm but authoritative. Mark laughed mawkishly. "And who are you, her knight in shining armor?" Chris didn't flinch. "Just a guy who hates bullies. Why don't you pick on someone who fights back?" The twins looked taken aback. Matt retorted, "We're just having a bit of fun, man. No need to get worked up." Chris's gaze was unwavering. "It's not fun if she's not laughing. How about showing some respect?" The tension was thick. The twins exchanged a glance, shrugged, and walked away, muttering insults under their breath. Chris turned to me, his face softening. "Sorry about that. Some people just can't grow up. You okay?" he asked, a genuine concern in his eyes. I was still processing the swift change in events. "Yeah, I'm fine. Thanks for stepping in. That was really brave of you." Chris just smiled and shrugged it off. "I'm Chris, by the way. Couldn't just stand by and watch." "I'm Hannah. You really didn't have to do that, but I'm grateful." We ended up talking more. Chris was funny, with a no-nonsense attitude and a surprisingly warm smile. He told me about his job at a local mechanic shop and his passion for fixing up old cars. It was refreshing to talk to someone so grounded and real. As our conversation flowed, I realized how easy it was to talk to him. He listened intently, laughed at my jokes, and shared stories of his own. He had this effortless charm about him that was hard to ignore. When it was time to leave, I found myself wishing the conversation didn't have to end. Chris walked me to the door, and we exchanged numbers. As I walked away, I couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement. Meeting Chris felt like the beginning of something new and unexpected. It's funny how life works. One moment you're just going about your day, and the next, you meet someone who changes everything. That day in the coffee shop, I met Chris, and little did I know, my life was about to change in ways I couldn't have imagined. Meeting Chris, who had bravely stood up for me at a coffee shop, had quickly turned my life into a whirlwind romance. First came the visit to Chris's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, in their cozy suburban home. Mrs. Johnson, a petite woman with a big heart, greeted us with open arms. "Chris! And this must be Hannah. We've heard so much about you." I felt a warmth in her embrace. "It's really nice to meet you, Mrs. Johnson," I said, smiling. "Oh, please, call me Linda," she insisted, leading us into a living room that felt lived in and welcoming. Mr. Johnson, a tall man with a firm handshake, joined us. "Welcome, Hannah. We're glad Chris found someone special." The conversation over dinner was heartfelt. They asked about my life, and for the first time, I felt valued for who I was, not for my family's wealth. The real challenge, however, was introducing Chris to my parents. My father, a real estate tycoon, and my mother, a high-profile lawyer, had standards as high as skyscrapers. Their reception was polite but cold. "Dad, Mom, this is Chris." I introduced him, trying to mask my nervousness. Chris, maintaining his composure, extended a handshake. "Mr. and Mrs. Anderson, it's an honor to meet you." My dad's handshake was firm, his eyes scrutinizing. "Chris, I hear you work at a mechanic shop. Tell me, how do you plan to provide for my daughter?" Chris didn't miss a beat. "I'm saving up, sir. Planning to run my own shop someday." The dinner felt more like an interrogation, with my dad throwing sharp questions, almost challenging Chris's worth. After Chris left, my dad summoned me to his study. "Hannah, that boy isn't right for you," he said, his voice stern. He slid a folder across his desk towards me. "I've done some digging. You need to see this." Furious, I pushed the folder back without opening it. "I can't believe you'd stoop this low. I trust Chris." "Hannah, don't be a fool," he retorted, his voice rising. "This isn't just a game. It's your future." I grabbed the folder, tore it in half, and stormed out, leaving the pieces on the floor. I was fuming. How dare he pry into Chris's life and judge him without knowing him? That night, I lay in bed, my mind racing. Part of me wondered if I was too quick to dismiss my father's concerns, but my heart was steadfast. Chris was the man I loved, and no background check was going to change that. As our wedding day approached, I found myself caught in a whirlwind of requests from Chris and his parents. It all started one evening at Chris's house, a few months before the wedding. "Hannah, we were thinking," Chris started, a hint of hesitation in his voice. "Since you, well, you know, have the means, could you maybe cover the wedding expenses?" His parents, Linda and Mr. Johnson, nodded in agreement, their eyes hopeful yet a bit too eager. I was taken aback but masked my surprise with a smile. "Sure, I can do that. It's our special day, after all." As the weeks passed, their requests grew. We were at a high-end boutique, selecting wedding attire when Linda pointed at an extravagant dress. "Oh, Hannah, this is beautiful, but it's so pricey." I caught the hint. "Don't worry, Linda. If you like it, it's yours." Mr. Johnson chimed in, eyeing a suit. "Well, if we're all dressing up, might as well go all out, right?" I laughed, a bit nervously, and nodded. "Of course, Mr. Johnson." Their gratitude was short-lived and soon turned into expectation. Every meeting brought a new request. "Hannah, dear, could we add this to the menu? Or, how about a bigger flower arrangement?" I found myself agreeing each time, partly because I was in love and partly because I didn't want to disappoint them. But deep down, I felt a twinge of resentment at their growing entitlement. On the wedding day, everything was lavish, paid for from my pocket. Chris looked dashing, and his parents were beaming in their expensive outfits. My parents arrived, their expressions stiff. After the ceremony, during the reception, my father stood up to speak. The room fell silent. "Hannah has always lived a life of luxury," he began, his voice stern. "But it's time she learned the real world. As of today, she's financially cut off. A wave of whispers swept through the room. I felt my face flush with embarrassment. Chris squeezed my hand, his expression a mix of shock and worry. "Dad, you can't do this," I said, my voice trembling. "This is for your own good, Hannah. You need to learn to fend for yourself," he replied, unyielding. The rest of the evening felt surreal. Chris and his parents were unusually quiet. As we left, Chris pulled me aside. "Hannah, what are we going to do?" I forced a smile. "We'll manage, Chris. We have each other." But as we drove away, a sinking feeling settled in my stomach. My father's words echoed in my ears, and I couldn't shake off the feeling that my once blissful relationship was about to face its toughest test yet. The honeymoon period didn't last long after the wedding. I quickly realized that my marriage to Chris was going to be nothing like I had imagined. The shift was abrupt and jarring. We moved into Chris's parents' house temporarily, or so I thought. The first morning, I came down to breakfast and was met with cold stares from Linda and Mr. Johnson. The air was thick with tension. "Morning," I said, trying to sound cheerful. Linda didn't look up from her coffee. "You should start looking for a job, Hannah. We can't afford to feed an extra mouth here." I was taken aback. "Oh, I thought. I mean, Chris and I talked about me finding something, but I didn't expect." Mr. Johnson cut in, his tone harsh. "Well, your father cut you off, right? Time to pull your weight." I looked at Chris, hoping for some support, but he just stared at his plate. The loving, caring man I married seemed to have vanished. The following days were worse. Chris had turned cold and distant. One evening, as we were clearing the dinner table, he said, "You need to start contributing, Hannah. It's not fair to my parents." I felt a lump in my throat. "Chris, I'm trying. I didn't expect things to change this fast." He scoffed. "Welcome to the real world, Hannah. You can't always rely on Daddy's money." His words stung. I retreated to our room, feeling alone and betrayed. The man who once defended me in public was now a stranger, echoing his parents' harshness. The situation at home became increasingly difficult. Chris's parents treated me more like a burden than a family member. One afternoon, Mr. Johnson cornered me in the living room. "Hannah, you need to fix things with your father. We need that money," he demanded, his eyes cold and calculating. I stood my ground, although my voice shook. "I won't beg my father for money. I thought you welcomed me as family, not for my father's wealth." He laughed bitterly. "Family? No, we thought you were our ticket to an easy life. But you're just a spoiled brat with no sense of reality." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The loving family facade had fallen away, revealing their true motives. I was a means to an end, nothing more. That night, I lay in bed, unable to sleep. The walls of the room felt like they were closing in on me. I was trapped in a house with people who saw me as nothing more than a cash cow, and the man I loved had turned into someone I didn't recognize. I missed my old life, but I was determined not to run back to my father. I had to figure this out on my own. But as the days passed, the weight of my situation grew heavier. I was stuck in a loveless marriage, with in-laws who only cared about what I could bring them financially. The harsh reality of my new life was nothing like the fairy tale I had envisioned. I was in a battle, not just for my independence, but for my dignity and self-worth. Living in Chris's parents' house, I, Hannah, was starting to feel the walls closing in on me. The atmosphere was tense, and the kindness I once saw in Chris and his family had completely vanished. Then, things started to disappear, first small items, then something big. One morning, I noticed my engagement ring wasn't on my bedside table where I usually kept it. Panicking, I searched the room, but it was nowhere to be found. "Chris, have you seen my ring?" I asked, trying to keep the worry out of my voice. He shrugged, not even looking up from his phone. "Maybe you misplaced it. It'll turn up." But it didn't. A few days later, I confronted Linda about it. Linda, my engagement ring is missing. It's really important to me. Her response was cold, devoid of the warmth I once knew. Maybe you should be more careful with your things, Hannah. I couldn't believe her indifference. That ring was the last symbol of the love Chris and I shared, or so I thought. Then, more items started disappearing, a pair of earrings here, a designer handbag there. It was like pieces of my old life were being erased, one item at a time. One evening, I caught Linda rummaging through my closet. "What are you doing?" I demanded, my voice shaking with anger. Linda turned, a pair of my shoes in her hand. "We need money, Hannah. These things are just sitting here." I was shocked. "You're selling my things? How could you?" Chris walked in, overhearing the confrontation. "Hannah, we're struggling here. You can't just expect to live off us." I stared at him, disbelief and hurt welling up inside me. "So, you're okay with this? With your parents selling my belongings?" He avoided my gaze. "We have to get by somehow." I felt betrayed and alone. The people I once called family were now treating me like an ATM, disposing of my possessions without a second thought. Night after night, I lay awake, wondering how my fairy tale romance had turned into this nightmare. I was living with people who saw me as nothing more than a source of income. My love, my trust, my belongings, all were being taken from me, piece by piece. It was a harsh awakening. The life I had known, the love I had cherished, all seemed like a distant dream. I was trapped in a reality where I was nothing more than a means to an end, and my heart ached with the weight of this cruel revelation. The days at Chris's parents' house grew longer and darker for me. I was struggling to grasp the reality of my situation. I felt isolated, with my belongings disappearing and the family I married into showing their true colors. But nothing prepared me for the chilling discovery I was about to make. It was a late evening, and I was heading to the kitchen for a glass of water when I overheard hushed voices from the living room. Curiosity piqued, I tiptoed closer. It was Chris, Linda, and Mr. Johnson, talking in low, urgent tones. "We need to figure something out, and fast," Chris was saying, his voice laced with frustration. Linda chimed in, "We're at our wits' end. Hannah's not of much use anymore, not without her father's money." I felt a chill run down my spine. I pressed myself against the wall, straining to hear more. Mr. Johnson's voice was gruff. "We could try reaching out to her father, make up some story. Maybe a health scare, something that'll make him open his wallet." My heart pounded in my chest. Were they really plotting to extort money from my father by lying? Chris's response was even more shocking. "No, he won't buy it. We need something more convincing. Maybe if something were to happen to Hannah, an accident, he'd be more inclined to help." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My husband, the man I loved, was suggesting putting me in harm's way to get money. Linda's voice was cold. "That might work. Her father would have to pay up then." I felt sick to my stomach. Trembling, I backed away from the door, my mind racing. This wasn't just betrayal, it was a threat to my safety. The next morning, Chris found me in the kitchen, his demeanor oddly calm. "Hannah, you look stressed. Everything okay?" I masked my fear, opting to keep my knowledge of their plan to myself. "Just a headache," I lied. Chris's eyes narrowed slightly. "You know, your phone is pretty valuable. We could sell it for some extra cash." Panic surged through me, but I had to think fast. Actually, I was thinking, maybe I could call my dad. Ask him for some money. Chris's expression changed to one of interest. "Really? You'd do that?" I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yes, I'll talk to him. Just let me keep my phone for now." He eyed me for a moment, then shrugged. "Fine. But make it quick. We need the money." I nodded, relief washing over me. Keeping my phone meant I had a lifeline, a way to get help. As Chris walked away, I realized the gravity of my situation. I was in a house with people who saw me as nothing more than a cash cow, willing to go to any lengths to get what they wanted. That day, I understood the true colors of the man I married and his family. They were not the loving, caring people I thought I knew. Instead, they were predators, ready to sacrifice my well-being for their gain. Trapped in a house with people plotting against me, I was gripped by fear and desperation. With my father's number dialed on my phone, I faced Chris and his parents, who insisted on being present during the call. "Go on, call him. We want to hear what he says," Chris demanded, a hard edge to his voice. Mr. Johnson stood with his arms crossed, nodding in agreement. "Yeah, let's see if your daddy really cares." Taking a deep breath, I pressed the call button, my hands trembling. "Dad, it's Hannah," I said, trying to sound calm. "Hannah, what's going on?" Dad's voice was filled with concern. Remembering the code phrase he taught me as a child, I said casually, "Dad, do you remember my old teddy bear, Mr. Snuggles? I really miss him." There was a brief silence on the other end. "Yes, I remember. Don't worry, we'll take care of it," Dad replied, his voice now stern with a hidden urgency. Chris and his parents looked at each other, confused by our cryptic exchange. "So, is he going to send the money?" Chris asked, his impatience growing. I nodded, playing along. "Yes," he said, "he'll help us." An hour passed, the longest hour of my life. Chris and his parents were smirking, confident in their deceitful plan. But their smug expressions turned to horror as the front door was suddenly kicked open. Men in suits, clearly my father's security, stormed in. My father was right behind them, his face a mask of fury and concern. "What the hell is this?" Mr. Johnson blustered, stepping forward only to be restrained by the security. Chris stood up, his face pale. "Mr. Anderson, what are you doing here?" My father's gaze was icy as he walked up to me. "Hannah, are you all right?" I nodded, fighting back tears. "Yes, Dad, I'm okay, now." He turned to Chris and his parents, his voice thundering through the room. "You've been threatening my daughter, trying to manipulate her? That's not going to fly." Chris tried to speak, but the security team was already handcuffing him and his parents. The realization that their plan had failed was written all over their faces. As the police arrived to take over, my father wrapped his arm around my shoulders, leading me out of the house. The place I had once entered with hope and love was now a scene of a failed extortion plot. Sitting in my father's car, driving away from that nightmare, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The danger was over, thanks to the secret code and my father's swift action. After the terrifying ordeal with Chris and his parents, I found myself sitting in a courtroom, a mix of anxiety and determination in my heart. As I sat there, waiting for the trial to begin, my father, sitting next to me, squeezed my hand. "You're doing the right thing, Hannah," he whispered. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. Chris, Linda, and Mr. Johnson were brought in, their faces a mixture of shame and defiance. The trial began, and it was my turn to testify. Standing there, facing the people I once called family, I felt a surge of courage. "Your Honor, these people manipulated and threatened me. They planned to harm me for financial gain," I said, my voice steady. Chris's lawyer tried to discredit me. "Isn't it true, Miss Anderson, that you're just a spoiled rich girl, upset over a family dispute?" I held my ground. "No, this is about them trying to use me. They saw me as nothing more than a cash cow." The evidence was overwhelming, especially the recording of their plot and the testimony from my father's security team. Chris and his parents sat there, heads bowed, as the reality of their actions sank in. Finally, the judge delivered the verdict. For the crimes of extortion and conspiracy to commit harm, I sentenced the defendants. The judge's words were a blur as relief washed over me. Justice was being served. Chris and his parents would pay for what they did. After the trial, my father and I walked out of the courthouse. "I'm sorry, Dad, for not listening to you," I said, tears in my eyes. He hugged me. "It's okay, Hannah. You thought you were in love. We all make mistakes. As we walked, I realized this was more than just a trial. It was a lesson in trust, a hard-earned understanding of the world's harsh realities. I had been naive, but now I was wiser, stronger. My father's car pulled up, and before I got in, I looked back at the courthouse. This chapter of my life was closed, but a new one was beginning. A chapter where I would be more cautious, more aware of people's true intentions. I'm Martha, a 28-year-old massage therapist at a local hospital. My days usually involved routine treatments until Mrs. Rossi, a feisty retired woman with osteochondrosis, became my regular patient. She had a knack for prying into personal matters, which I usually navigated with a mix of professionalism and humor. One afternoon, as I was working on her stiff shoulders, Mrs. Rossi's voice cut through the room's tranquility. "Martha, dear, you have such magical hands. Tell me, what does a job like this pay?" I smiled, continuing my motions. "It's around $4,000 a month, Mrs. Rossi." She clucked her tongue in a mix of surprise and disappointment. "Only $4,000? I thought such a skill would fetch more." I shrugged, keeping the conversation light. "Well, it's enough for me. I enjoy the work more than anything." Changing gears, she suddenly said, "You know who you should meet? My son, Antonio. He's the owner of that Italian restaurant downtown. A real catch, if I may say so." I hesitated, recalling the few times I saw Antonio. He was quite charming and easy on the eyes. "I don't know, Mrs. Rossi. I'm quite busy with work." "Oh, nonsense," she exclaimed. "A young, attractive woman like you shouldn't be alone. Let me arrange something." Before I could protest, she had already made up her mind. True to her word, she set us up on a date at his restaurant. Antonio was more than I remembered, charming, with a warm smile and eyes that sparkled with humor. Our conversation flowed effortlessly, filled with laughter and shared interests. Weeks turned into months, and our casual dates grew into a serious relationship. One evening, as we walked along the river, Antonio stopped and looked into my eyes. "Martha, I've never met anyone like you. Will you marry me?" His proposal took me by surprise, but it felt right. "Yes, Antonio, I will." Our wedding was a small affair but full of love and joy. Afterward, Antonio suggested, "Why don't we move in with my mom? Her house is big, and we could save some money for our future." The idea seemed practical, and I agreed. Initially, life in the Rossi household was harmonious. I helped with chores, and we both contributed to the family expenses. Little did I know that this new chapter of my life would soon take a challenging turn. Living in the Rossi household started off as an agreeable arrangement, but a few months into our marriage, I began to notice a shift in responsibilities. It was gradual at first, but soon, the burden of household chores fell almost entirely on my shoulders. One weary evening, after spending the whole day relieving tense muscles and soothing aching joints at the hospital, I came home to a scene of chaos, dirty dishes piled high, laundry scattered, and the living room looking like it had been hit by a small tornado. Exhausted, I found Antonio sprawled on the sofa, engrossed in a football game. "Antonio, the house is a mess. Can you help me clean up?" I asked, trying to hide my frustration. He glanced around, seemingly oblivious. "Oh, it's not that bad, Martha. I had a rough day at the restaurant, lots of issues to deal with." I started picking up, feeling the day's fatigue weigh me down. "But you've been home for a while now, and I've just got back. It's only fair we both contribute." He let out a non-committal grunt, eyes glued to the screen. "You're better at this stuff than I am. I'd just get in the way." This pattern continued, growing more defined with each passing day. I found myself doing all the cooking, cleaning, and managing the home, while Antonio's contributions became increasingly scarce. A few days later, I decided to have a serious talk with him. After dinner, which I had prepared, I broached the topic. "Antonio, we need to discuss the housework. It's becoming overwhelming for me to handle everything alone." He looked up from his phone, seemingly annoyed. "What's there to discuss, Martha? You're great at managing the house. I'm busy with the restaurant." His dismissive attitude stung. "But we're a team, Antonio. It's not just about being good at something. We should share these responsibilities." He sighed, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. "Look, I'll try to help out more, but you know my work is demanding. I'm running a whole business, not just giving massages." I bit back a sharp retort, feeling belittled and misunderstood. "It's not about comparing jobs, Antonio. It's about supporting each other." As the days turned into weeks, the situation didn't improve. Antonio's promises to help more around the house remained unfulfilled. I found myself spending my few free hours doing household chores, feeling more like a housekeeper than his wife. One evening, as I collapsed on the couch after a long day, the reality of my situation hit me hard. The balance in our marriage had shifted dangerously, leaving me drained and undervalued. I realized that something needed to change, but I wasn't sure how to make Antonio see it too. The day Luca and his family moved in marked the beginning of an entirely new, exhausting chapter in our lives. Antonio broke the news to me nonchalantly, as if it was a minor change. "Martha, Luca lost his job. They can't pay rent, so they'll stay with us for a while," he explained, while I was setting the table for dinner. I stopped in my tracks, the plates in my hands feeling heavier. "For how long, Antonio? Our house isn't that big, and I'm already stretched thin." He shrugged, not meeting my eyes. "Just for a bit, until Luca finds a new job. It's family, Martha. We can't turn them away." Their arrival turned our already bustling household upside down. Anna, Luca's wife, seemed more interested in her social media than in managing her children or helping around the house. Their 3 kids, aged between 3 and 8, were little bundles of chaotic energy, leaving a trail of mess wherever they went. One afternoon, after stepping on a toy car for the umpteenth time, I approached Anna, who was scrolling through her phone. "Anna, could you please keep an eye on the kids? The house is turning into a war zone." She looked up, annoyance flickering in her eyes. "Martha, I'm busy with my own stuff. You don't have kids, you wouldn't understand." "But Anna, the mess and noise are overwhelming. I work too, and it's becoming impossible to manage," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She scoffed. "Well, I guess you just need to get better at multitasking, then." I walked away, feeling a mixture of anger and helplessness. When I brought it up with Antonio, hoping for some support, his response was disheartening. "Babe, they're family. We need to be there for them," he said, not looking up from the TV. "But what about us, our home? It's turning into chaos," I protested. He waved his hand dismissively. "It's not permanent. Besides, you handle things so well, Martha. You're great at this." Weeks turned into months with no sign of improvement. Luca spent his days on the computer, claiming to be job hunting, while the kids ran around unchecked. Anna rarely lifted a finger to help, leaving me to deal with the aftermath of their daily tornado. I started to dread coming home. My once peaceful haven was now a source of endless stress. Each day, I walked into a house that no longer felt like mine, catering to a family that barely acknowledged my exhaustion. The burden of cooking, cleaning, and maintaining order fell entirely on me. Despite my pleas for help or even just a little consideration, I was met with the same responses. "You're so good at this, Martha," or "it's just for a little longer." I lay awake at night, wondering how a situation meant to be temporary had become my new, overwhelming reality. I felt trapped, undervalued, and utterly alone in a house full of people. The funny thing is that I invested my entire salary in their family every month, all of $4,000. And they took it for granted. The tension in the house had been building like a pressure cooker, and it finally exploded one hectic evening. I came home to the usual chaos and mess, utterly exhausted from my workday. The sight of the unkempt house was the last straw. "Antonio!" I yelled, finding him lounging on the couch with a beer in hand. "This house is a disaster. I'm busting my back at work and I come home to this mess every day." Antonio looked up, irritation flashing in his eyes. Oh, cut the drama, Martha. It's just a bit messy. You're acting like it's the end of the world. I couldn't contain my frustration. A bit messy? Look around. It's like a pigsty and I'm the only one cleaning it up. That's when he lost it. He stood up abruptly, towering over me. Lazy? You call this lazy? I work my ass off at the restaurant while you just rub people's backs. And now you whine about a few dishes. His harsh words felt like a slap in the face. That's not fair, Antonio. I'm not your maid. This is supposed to be our home, not just mine to clean. Before I could say more, Mrs. Rossi chimed in, her voice dripping with disdain. Oh, please, Martha. You're just a freeloader here, living in my house, using our things. And you have the nerve to complain. I was taken aback by her vicious tone. A freeloader? Mrs. Rossi, I contribute to this house, I work hard too. She scoffed. Work hard? Ha! A real woman takes care of her home and family. You're just sloppy and ungrateful. Their words echoed in my head, each one a stinging affirmation of how little they valued me. I stood there, shaking with a mix of anger, shock, and hurt. Antonio didn't let up. You should be thankful, Martha. You have a roof over your head because of us. Maybe if you managed your time better, the house wouldn't be such a mess. I felt a surge of defiance. I am not your servant, Antonio. I am your wife, and I deserve respect. But it was like talking to a brick wall. They had their minds set, seeing me as nothing more than an accessory to their home. Lying in bed that night, I realized that this wasn't a home, it was a prison. And I was trapped with people who saw my efforts as trivial and my presence as a nuisance. It was a sobering, painful realization that I was in a battle I was losing. The day Antonio announced he wanted a divorce felt like a surreal nightmare. It happened during one of our rare family dinners, where the tension was already thick enough to cut with a knife. I was passing the salad when Antonio cleared his throat. Everyone, I have something to say, he announced, his voice eerily calm. I want a divorce, Martha. I froze, the bowl in my hands almost slipping. What? Antonio, what are you talking about? His gaze was cold, devoid of the warmth I once knew. I've met someone else, Martha. She's better for me. The room went silent. Even Mrs. Rossi looked shocked, but not for the reasons I hoped. How much does she earn? She blurted out, her priorities crystal clear. $8,000 a month, Antonio replied proudly, as if he'd won some prize. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. You're leaving me for money? He shrugged, the man I married nowhere in sight. It's not just about the money, Martha. She understands me, unlike you. I was struggling to process everything. And you think this is okay? To drop this bomb in front of everyone? Mrs. Rossi piped up, her voice sharp. Well, it's about time he found someone worthy. Someone who can actually take care of him. The sting of her words was overshadowed by the utter betrayal I felt from Antonio. He slid the divorce papers across the table. Just sign these, Martha. Let's end this amicably. My hands trembled as I took the pen. I felt numb, the reality of the situation sinking in. Amicably? After everything I've done for this family? Antonio's expression was cold, detached. It's for the best, Martha. You'll see. With a heavy heart and a sense of unreal detachment, I signed the papers. The room remained silent, the only sound being the scratching of the pen on paper. As I stood up, the weight of the situation finally hit me. I hope she's worth it, Antonio. I really do, I said, my voice laced with a relief I couldn't hide. I packed my things that night, the silence of the house echoing the hollowness I felt inside. Antonio and his family watched, their faces a mix of surprise and confusion at my calm demeanor. Little did they know, inside, I was even rejoicing at the thought of being free from this toxic environment. I closed the door behind me, leaving behind a life that was no longer mine. The night air felt crisp and refreshing, a stark contrast to the stifling atmosphere I had just escaped. As I walked away, I realized this was not an end, but a new beginning. Moving into my rented apartment was like stepping into a new world. I took all the furniture and fancy appliances I had bought, leaving behind nothing but empty spaces in Antonio's family home. It caused quite the uproar. I still remember the day Mrs. Rossi and Anna confronted me as I was loading the last of my things into the moving truck. "You can't just take all this stuff. It belongs in the house," Mrs. Rossi shouted, her face red with anger. I turned to face her, feeling a surge of defiance. "Actually, I bought all of this with my own money. It's mine, and I'm taking it with me," Anna chimed in, her tone dripping with disdain. "You're such a selfish brat, Martha. You think you can just walk away and take everything?" I shrugged, not letting their words get to me. "Call it what you want, but I'm done being your maid and your family's cash cow. I'm starting over." They were fuming as I drove away, but I felt an immense sense of relief, like I had shed a heavy burden. Settling into my new place, I reveled in the peace and quiet. It was small, but it was mine. The day I received the job offer from the prestigious medical center was the icing on the cake. The salary was nearly double what I was making before. I remember calling Sarah to share the news. "Guess what? I got a job offer from that famous medical center. It's a big leap in my career, and the pay is amazing." Sarah's excitement mirrored mine. "Martha, that's fantastic. You totally deserve this. You're going to kill it." The conversation was a stark contrast to the ones I had in Antonio's house. Here was a friend who believed in me and celebrated my achievements, not someone who saw me as just a means to an end. My first day at the new job was exhilarating. I was greeted with respect. Mr. Johnson, the center's director, welcomed me personally. "Martha, we're thrilled to have you on board. Your expertise is going to be a great asset to our team," he said with a genuine smile. I couldn't help but beam with pride. "Thank you, Mr. Johnson. I'm excited to be here and contribute to the center." Leaving the chaos of Antonio's family home and stepping into this new role was empowering. It felt like I had finally taken control of my life, steering it in the direction I wanted. The days of being undervalued and overburdened were behind me. Now, I was recognized for my worth, both professionally and personally. That night, as I sat in my quiet living room, sipping a cup of tea, I felt a profound sense of peace. The struggles and hardships had led me to this moment, and I was grateful for the journey. For the first time in a long while, I was genuinely excited about what the future held. It was a regular evening in my new life when I heard a forceful knock on my door. I opened it to find my ex-mother-in-law, Mrs. Rossi, standing there with an expression that reeked of desperation and frustration. "What do you want, Mrs. Rossi?" I asked, not hiding my annoyance. She barged in, her voice laced with urgency. "Martha, you need to come back. Antonio's restaurant is tanking. We're drowning in debt." I couldn't help but snort. "Come back? After the way you all treated me? You've got some nerve." She glared at me. "You're part of this family. It's your responsibility to help us out." I crossed my arms, feeling a surge of defiance. "My only responsibility is to myself. I'm not your family's ATM, Mrs. Rossi." She was seething. "You ungrateful wench. You think you're too good for us now, huh? Sitting pretty in your fancy apartment?" I shook my head, amused by her audacity. "I'm not ungrateful. I'm just done being used. What happened to that woman Antonio left me for?" Mrs. Rossi's face twisted in displeasure. "That gold digger? She left him as soon as the money troubles started. Shows what she was really after." I burst into laughter, the irony too rich to ignore. Well, looks like karma really does come around. Her eyes narrowed. "You think this is funny? We're struggling here, Martha." I leaned against the door frame, my resolve firm. "Not my circus, not my monkeys anymore, Mrs. Rossi. I've moved on. You should too." She huffed, her anger palpable. You'll regret this, Martha. When you're all alone and miserable, you'll wish you'd helped. I smiled, the sense of freedom filling me with confidence. I doubt that. Goodbye, Mrs. Rossi. And don't come back. She stormed out, slamming the door behind her. As I locked it, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. That chapter of my life was closed for good. I was finally free from the toxic grasp of a family that never truly valued me. My life was my own now, and I intended to live it on my terms. Life after the divorce and the last encounter with Mrs. Rossi felt like a breath of fresh air. I was thriving in my new job and enjoying my newfound independence. One day, while enjoying a coffee break at the wellness center, my colleague Mike dropped by. Hey, Martha, I heard about your run-in with the ex-mother-in-law. You okay? Mike asked, concern in his eyes. I chuckled, shaking my head. More than okay, Mike. It's like a bad sitcom, you know? I'm just glad it's over. Mike smiled. You've got some guts, Martha. Most people wouldn't have handled it as well as you did. I sipped my coffee, feeling a sense of pride. I guess I just reached my limit, Mike. No more drama for me. The conversation shifted to work, and as I talked with Mike, I realized how much my life had improved. I was no longer weighed down by the negativity and manipulation of my former family. Later that week, I caught up with Sarah over dinner. She had been my steadfast supporter through all the ups and downs. You look great, Martha. Really, like a weight's been lifted off your shoulders, Sarah observed as we sat in a cozy restaurant. I smiled, feeling a surge of gratitude. Thanks, Sarah. It's been a journey, but I'm finally at a place where I feel happy and in control. Sarah raised her glass. To new beginnings and to a friend who's shown what strength really is. I clinked my glass with hers. To new beginnings and to friends who stand by you through thick and thin. The evening was filled with laughter and positive conversations, a stark contrast to the tense and uncomfortable dinners at my former in-laws. As I lay in bed that night, I reflected on the changes in my life. I had faced adversity, but it had led to growth and new opportunities. I had learned my worth and vowed never to let anyone treat me as less than I deserved. The following morning, I received a text from Antonio. It was short and seemed filled with regret. I'm sorry for everything, Martha. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me. I stared at the message for a long moment. Forgiving Antonio wasn't about absolving him of his mistakes, it was about freeing myself from any lingering bitterness. I typed a response, my heart light and free. Antonio, I've moved on. I forgive you, but more for my peace than yours. Take care. Sending the text felt like closing a chapter. I was no longer bound by the past, and the future looked bright. I had come out of this ordeal stronger and more resilient. As I prepared for work, I felt a sense of excitement about the possibilities that lay ahead. My journey had taught me about resilience, self-worth, and the power of moving forward. I was ready for whatever life had in store for me, and I knew that no matter what, I had the strength to face it head-on.
I never thought juggling cameras, kids, and a calendar crammed with appointments would be my daily circus. But here I am, at 39, a freelance photographer with a life that's always a click away from chaos. My name's Sarah, and my world revolves around two things: my camera lens and my family. My husband, Mike, is the kind of guy who's married to his job. He works as a sales rep for a company with branches across 3 cities. I can't remember the last time we had a meal together without him rushing off or being glued to his laptop. And then, there are our kids, Lily and Max, both in school, and a whirlwind of activities and homework. Mama, have you seen my math book? Lily's voice snaps me back from my thoughts as I sort through my camera gear. It's probably under the pile of clothes in your room, I reply, without looking up. Max runs in, his soccer ball thumping against the walls. Mom, can you sign this form for my field trip? Sure, bud. Just give me a minute, I say, balancing a camera in one hand and the form in the other. As the kids dash off to their rooms, I hear the front door open and close. Mike's home, probably just to grab something and dash off again. His presence in the house has become like a cameo appearance in a long-running show. "Hey Mike, how was your day?" I ask, not expecting much of a conversation. Same old, just tired. Got another trip tomorrow," he says, barely looking up from his phone. "I was thinking maybe this weekend we could do something as a family. You know, take the kids out or something," I suggest, hoping for a change. "Yeah, maybe. I'll see how it goes," he replies, his attention still on his phone. I sigh, realizing it's a lost cause. It's always maybe or we'll see. The kids and I have become experts at filling in the blanks of his absence. The evening rolls on with the usual routine: dinner, homework, bedtime stories, and finally, some quiet. I sit on the porch, my camera by my side, capturing the night sky. It's my moment of peace, a brief escape from the relentless pace of life. But who am I kidding? Even in these quiet moments, my mind races with tomorrow's to-do list, unanswered emails, and the ever-looming question, when will things change? As I head back inside, I make a mental note to check my schedule for next week. It's a balancing act, and I'm the ringmaster of my own chaotic circus. But in this hustle and bustle, I often wonder, when did life become a series of tasks to tick off rather than moments to live? Life as a freelance photographer is never predictable, but nothing prepared me for the curveball I was about to receive. It was just another Wednesday morning, and I was out for a walk with our dog, Buster. The sun was shining, but my mind was cloudy with thoughts of upcoming projects and deadlines. "Come on, Buster, let's make this quick. Mommy's got a ton of editing to do," I muttered, tugging slightly at his leash. Just as we turned the corner near the park, Buster spotted a cat, and in a split second, everything went haywire. He lunged forward, pulling the leash with such force that I lost my balance and fell hard onto the pavement. "Ow! Buster, stop!" I yelled, but he was too busy chasing the cat to notice. I tried to get up, but a sharp pain shot through my leg. Great, just what I needed. Limping back home, I called Mike. "Hey, I think I hurt my leg. Can you come home early?" "Sarah, I'm in a meeting. Can it wait?" His voice was curt, a clear sign of his irritation. "I just fell, Mike. It's not like I'm calling for fun," I snapped, frustration boiling over. "Fine, I'll see what I can do," he replied, and the line went dead. After what felt like an eternity, I made it home. The pain was getting worse. I knew I had to see a doctor, but with Mike's unpredictable schedule and the kids at school, it was a logistical nightmare. The diagnosis was a fractured leg. Great. Just what I needed on top of everything else. The doctor advised rest, meaning no shoots, no chasing after the kids, nothing. As if my life wasn't chaotic enough. Back home, with my leg in a cast, I felt like a bird trapped in a cage. Mike had to take over some of my duties, which he did with an obvious lack of enthusiasm. "This is a real mess, Sarah. How long till you're back on your feet?" Mike asked, his tone more concerned with the inconvenience than my pain. "A few weeks at least. It's not like I planned this, you know," I retorted, my patience wearing thin. The kids were surprisingly helpful, though. Lily took over some of the house chores, and Max tried his best to be less of a tornado around the house. "Mom, can I get you anything?" Lily asked, her concern genuine. "Just some peace would be nice," I replied with a tired smile. Days turned into weeks. I was stuck at home, my world reduced to the four walls of our living room. Mike was out most of the time, and the kids were busy with school. The loneliness was suffocating. In a desperate attempt to find something to occupy my time, I decided to explore photography forums online. Little did I know, this decision would turn my world upside down. Stuck at home with my leg in a cast, I found myself diving deeper into the world of online photography forums. It was a nice distraction, scrolling through endless galleries of beautiful images. It almost made me forget the throbbing pain in my leg. Almost. One evening, while mindlessly browsing, something caught my eye. A photo of a man proposing to a young woman. The scene was picturesque, but it wasn't the romantic setting that grabbed my attention. It was the man in the photo. He looked exactly like Mike, my husband. Same build, same hair, even the same suit that I had bought him last Christmas. No, this can't be, I murmured to myself, my heart pounding. It just looks like him, that's all. But the more I looked at it, the more I couldn't shake the feeling. It was more than just a resemblance. I had to know more. I messaged the photographer, a woman named Jenna. Hi Jenna, I came across your photo of the marriage proposal. Can you tell me more about it? Where was it taken? Jenna replied quickly. Sure, that was taken in Riverdale. Lovely couple. Why do you ask? I hesitated, not sure how to explain without sounding paranoid. I was just curious. The man in the photo looks a lot like someone I know. I waited anxiously for her response, hoping she'd offer more information. But instead, she went silent. No reply came. Days passed, and the image haunted me. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every time Mike came home, I studied his face, looking for any sign of guilt, any hint of betrayal. But he was his usual detached self, buried in his phone or laptop. One evening, I couldn't take it anymore. I confronted him. Mike, have you ever been to Riverdale on your business trips? I asked, trying to sound casual. Yeah, a few times. Why? He didn't even look up from his phone. No reason. Just asking, I said, my voice trembling. The uncertainty was eating me alive. I had to know. I messaged Jenna again, this time more directly. Jenna, I need to know. The man in your proposal photo, can you send me more shots of him? I think he might be my husband. This time, Jenna responded, I'm sorry, I can't do that. It's against my policy to share personal photos without my client's consent. I pleaded, explaining my situation and my growing suspicions. After what felt like an eternity, Jenna finally relented. Okay, I understand. I'll send you a few more shots, but please keep this between us. When the photos arrived, my heart sank. There he was, my Mike, down on one knee, holding a ring to a woman I had never seen before. The same loving gaze he once gave me was now directed at her. I sat there, staring at the screen, tears streaming down my face. My world, my marriage, everything I believed in, shattered in an instant. I never imagined myself in the role of a woman who'd hire a private detective. Yet, there I was, sitting across from Rick, a seasoned investigator with a face that didn't give anything away. I handed him photos of Mike and a list of cities he frequently visited. I need to know what he's doing on these trips, I said, my voice a strange mix of fear and resolve. Rick nodded, his eyes scanning the photos. I'll track his movements, see who he meets, but it's going to take some time. You okay with that? I was far from okay, but I nodded. I need the truth, was all I could muster. As Rick delved into his investigation, I was forced into a role I never wanted, the wife who pretends everything is normal. Mike, oblivious to the storm brewing, continued his business trips, leaving me alone with my swirling thoughts. I started noticing changes in Mike that I'd never seen before. His wardrobe underwent a transformation, suits that screamed designer labels, shoes that weren't from our usual budget stores. His cologne was different too, replaced by a scent that was more refined, more luxurious. These were subtle changes, but to me, they were glaring. Then there were the phone calls. Mike had always been private with his phone, but now it was excessive. He'd lock himself in the bathroom, speaking in hushed tones. I once pressed my ear against the door, trying to catch snippets of his conversation, but all I could hear was the muffled sound of his voice. I watched him closely, trying to find traces of the man I married in his new persona. But with every passing day, he seemed more like a stranger. I wondered how long he had been living this double life, right under my nose. The kids started to notice the tension. Lily, ever perceptive, asked one night, Mom, is everything okay with you and Dad? I forced a smile. Everything's fine, sweetie. Just a lot on my mind with work. But it wasn't fine. The man I shared my bed with, the father of my children, felt like a mirage. I found myself lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, piecing together the lies and half-truths. One evening, as Mike prepared for another trip, I found myself watching him pack. He moved with such ease, a routine he had mastered. There was no hesitation, no signs of guilt. It struck me then, how easy it is to deceive someone who trusts you completely. I reflected on our years together, wondering when the lies began. Had I been naive, too trusting? Or had I chosen to ignore the signs, too wrapped up in my own world? Weeks went by, and Rick finally called. "We need to meet." His voice was serious, carrying a weight that made my heart sink. We met at a quiet corner of a nearly empty cafe. He slid a thick envelope across the table. "I found quite a bit. You sure you're ready for this?" I wasn't sure of anything anymore, but I nodded. Inside the envelope were photos, receipts, and detailed reports. Every piece of evidence was like a knife twisting in my heart. There he was, my Mike, but not the Mike I knew. In each city, there was a different woman, a different life. I felt a mix of anger, sadness, and betrayal. My mind raced with questions. How could he do this? How long had he been living this lie? I paid Rick, barely speaking as I left. Walking home, the envelope felt like it weighed a ton. I realized then that all this while, I had been living with my eyes closed. I had refused to see the man Mike had become, clinging to the image of the husband I thought I knew. Now, with my eyes wide open, I saw everything clearly. The lies, the deceit, the reality of my marriage laid bare. It was a truth I couldn't run from anymore. Holding on to the truth about Mike's infidelities was like keeping a storm inside me. But I kept the photos a secret. I wasn't going to let him off easy. No, he deserved more than just a confrontation. He deserved a reckoning. I wanted to give him an unpleasant surprise, one that he'd remember for the rest of his life. As the days passed, my leg finally healed. I could walk without wincing in pain, a small victory that felt like a fresh start. But as one part of me healed, another part plotted revenge. Mike continued his routine, unaware of the storm brewing under his nose. He left for his trips and came back, slipping further into his web of lies. He thought he was smart, but he didn't know that I was now playing the game too. I crafted a plan, something that would expose his deceit in the most dramatic way possible. I wasn't going to tip my hand by letting him know what I knew. No, this had to be a surprise. I spent hours thinking, planning, making sure every detail was perfect. I watched him, pretending everything was normal, but inside, I was counting down the days. My heart had turned cold, each beat a reminder of his betrayal. Finally, everything was in place. The trap was set, and all I had to do was wait for the right moment. Mike was oblivious, still wrapped up in his lies, thinking he had fooled me. He had no idea what was coming. As I lay in bed that night, the phrase, "Revenge is a dish best served cold," echoed in my mind. I realized that was exactly what I was doing, serving him his just desserts, cold and unyielding. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice, about taking back my life from someone who thought he could play me for a fool. The night I planned to confront Mike was etched in my mind like a date with destiny. I cooked his favorite meal, set the table with our best china, and even put on the dress he always said he liked. It was all a facade, a stage set for the final act. Mike walked in, looking tired but surprised at the effort I'd put in. "Wow, what's all this for?" he asked, a slight smile playing on his lips. "Just felt like doing something special," I replied, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside. We sat down, and for a while, I played the part of the doting wife. We talked about mundane things, but I was just biding my time, waiting for the right moment. The doorbell rang, and that was my cue. "Can you get that, honey?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. Mike got up, still unsuspecting, and walked to the door. I heard his footsteps, the door opening, and then a moment of silence before his voice, laced with shock. "What are you doing here?" I walked to the doorway, and there they were, the girl from the photos and her parents. The look on Mike's face was priceless, a mix of shock, fear, and confusion. "Sarah, what is this?" Mike turned to me, his voice a mix of accusation and panic. "This is me, giving you a taste of your own medicine," I said, my voice cold and sharp. The girl, tears in her eyes, confronted Mike. "You said you loved me, that we were going to be together." Her parents were furious, demanding answers, their voices raised in anger. Mike tried to speak, but words seemed to fail him. "You've been living a lie, Mike, and I have all the proof," I said, holding up the envelope Rick had given me. Mike's face went from red to pale. He looked at me, then at the girl and her parents, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "You're a liar and a cheat," I spat out, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. The room was filled with shouting, accusations flying. Mike tried to explain, to apologize, but it was too late. The truth was out, and there was no going back. As the girl and her parents left, the reality of what had just happened seemed to sink in for Mike. He looked at me, his eyes searching for something, maybe forgiveness or understanding. But all I felt was disgust. "You need to leave," I said, my voice void of emotion. He didn't argue, just packed a few things and left. The house was suddenly quiet, the echoes of the confrontation still hanging in the air. The days following the confrontation were a blur. The house, once filled with the noise of our family, now echoed with a haunting silence. I kept busy, trying to distract myself from the emptiness and the hurt. Lily and Max knew something was wrong. They could sense the change in the air, the absence of their father's presence. I sat them down one evening, knowing I had to explain things, even if it broke my heart. "Kids, your dad and I, we're going to be living apart for a while," I said, my voice trembling. "Why, Mom? Did we do something wrong?" Max's innocent eyes searched mine for answers. "No, honey, it's not you. It's just, Dad made some mistakes and we need some time apart," I tried to explain without revealing too much. Lily, older and more perceptive, understood more than I wished she would. "Is Dad not coming back?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know, sweetheart," I replied, holding back my own tears. I started the divorce proceedings, a process that was both liberating and soul-crushing. Mike tried to reach out, sending messages of apology, of wanting to talk. But I couldn't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The legal battles began. I fought for the house, for alimony, for everything we had built together. It was a messy, painful process, but I was determined to get what we deserved. One day, I was going through some old boxes and found a photo of Mike and me on our wedding day. I stared at it, at the happy, hopeful faces we once were. It felt like a lifetime ago. "Why did he do it, Mom? Why did Dad hurt us?" Max asked, coming into the room. I put the photo down, looking at my son. "Sometimes people make bad choices, Max, and those choices hurt the people they love." "But do you still love Dad?" he asked, his eyes full of confusion. I sighed, a mix of sadness and resignation in my heart. "I don't know, Max. I'm just trying to figure out what's best for us now." The weeks turned into months. The divorce was finalized, leaving me with a mix of relief and a deep sense of loss. I started focusing more on my photography, taking on more assignments. It was a way to rebuild, to find myself again. One evening, Lily came to me. "Mom, are we going to be okay?" I hugged her, feeling her small body shake with sobs. "Yes, we are. We're going to be just fine." Life didn't stop after the divorce. If anything, it kept moving at a relentless pace. The kids and I settled into a new routine, finding our footing in this altered reality. We were a team, the three of us, facing each day with a mix of resilience and hope. As for Mike, I heard bits and pieces through the grapevine. His world, it seemed, was unraveling at the seams. The women he deceived banded together, filing a collective lawsuit against him. The scandal spilled over into his work, leading to a demotion. He was drowning in debts and legal troubles. But that part of my life was behind me. I had more pressing, more pleasant things to focus on. One sunny afternoon, while I was setting up for a family photo shoot in a park, Lily called me. Her voice was bright, filled with excitement. "Mom, guess what? I won first place in the art competition." "That's wonderful, Lily. I'm so proud of you," I replied, my heart swelling with pride. Max, too, was thriving. He had found a passion for soccer and was making new friends on the team. "Mom, you should come to my game this Saturday. I might score a goal," he said one evening, his eyes shining with enthusiasm. Life with the kids was busy, filled with school events, soccer matches, and art exhibitions. We were a tight unit, supporting each other through thick and thin. My photography business was also picking up. I landed a few big contracts, photographing events, and doing portrait sessions. The lens was my window to the world, allowing me to capture moments of joy, of life moving forward. One evening, as I sat editing photos, I reflected on the past months. The pain of betrayal, the turmoil of the divorce. It all seemed like a distant memory now. I had found strength I didn't know I possessed. The doorbell rang, pulling me from my thoughts. It was my friend and neighbor Martha, dropping by with some coffee and a friendly smile. "How are you holding up?" she asked as we sat in the living room. "I'm doing okay, actually. Better than okay," I replied, a sense of contentment washing over me. "That's great to hear. You know, you've really inspired me with your strength," Martha said, her eyes sincere. We chatted for a while, talking about work, life, and everything in between. It was nice to have a friend who understood my journey. As Martha left, I looked around my home, filled with laughter, love, and the evidence of a life moving forward. The hardships had not defined us. Instead, they had forged us into something stronger. Life was good, not perfect, but good. And for now, that was more than enough. I'm Liz, and by some twist of fate, I'm married to the most amazing guy I've ever met, Alex. We're both 28, got our own place, pay our bills, and live a life that's ours. It's been a year since we said I do, and honestly, life's been good, except for one little thing: Alex's parents. Now, don't get me wrong, I never expected to be the daughter-in-law in shining armor, but I also didn't expect to be the family's unwanted guest. The day I met my in-laws, it felt like walking into a lion's den with a stake tied to my neck. My mother-in-law, Jane, had this way of looking at me, like she was trying to figure out if I was more of a nuisance or just plain boring. I could tell she had sized me up and found me lacking before I even had a chance to say hello. Alex had warned me about his mom. "She can be a bit much," he said, as we drove to their place that first time. "But don't take it to heart, okay?" I didn't. Or at least I tried not to. At dinner, I was passing the salt when Jane said, "You know, Stephanie used to cook such wonderful meals. Remember that risotto, honey?" she said to Alex, who just nodded, his jaw tight. "Yeah, I remember," he replied, not looking at me. I sat there, salt shaker in hand, feeling like I was invisible. They all talked about Stephanie as if I wasn't there. I felt a pang in my chest, but I swallowed it down with a smile. "Sounds like she was a great cook," I said, trying to seem unaffected. Jane's eyes met mine, and she smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh, she was. She was a lot of things." That night, I told Alex how I felt. "It's like she's measuring me against some ghost." Alex hugged me close. "You're the one I chose, Liz. That's all that matters." I wanted to believe him, but as I'd learned, Jane had a long game in mind, and I was the pawn she was eager to sacrifice. I just didn't know it yet. Living with an allergy isn't just inconvenient. It's like having a shadow that's constantly whispering danger in your ear. Since I was a kid, peanuts have been my arch nemesis. It started with a spoonful of peanut paste and a trip to the emergency room that left my parents with a crystal clear message. Keep her away from peanuts and a whole host of other foods if you want her to grow up. It's not just peanuts, though. Soy, peas, cherries, almonds, tomatoes, apricots, bananas, and even potatoes, they're all off limits. It's a list that makes waiters raise an eyebrow and friends hesitate to invite me over for dinner. It's also a list that my mother-in-law, Jane, knows by heart, yet she somehow manages to question every single time we're over for dinner. "Are you sure you can't even have a little bit of this pie? It's got almond extract," she'd ask, with a tone that hovered between concern and disbelief. I would smile politely, though I'd rather not, and say, "Yeah, I'm sure. Thanks, though." It was the same dance every time. I remember once, at a family gathering, I was navigating the buffet, a mental checklist running through my head. Alex was by my side, plate in hand, trying to help me find something safe to eat. That's when Jane swooped in, her voice sickly sweet. "Liz, you must try this casserole. I made sure it was Liz-friendly," she announced, but the glint in her eye didn't match her nurturing words. Alex paused, his fork mid-air. "Mom, you used cream of mushroom soup in this, right?" he asked, knowing full well that many brands included soy, a big no-no for me. Jane's smile faltered for a second. "Oh, I think so," It should be fine. But it wasn't fine, and we both knew it. We made our excuses, me leaving the casserole untouched. But the incident stuck with me. It was a small victory in what felt like an ongoing battle, a battle where Jane held all the cards because she controlled the kitchen. I've learned to navigate this world with careful steps. Eating out is a strategic operation. Alex and I were at our favorite Italian place, a rare find that understood the gravity of food allergies. I'd recited my usual spiel to the waiter, who nodded understandingly. Alex watched me with those soft eyes of his, the ones that said he'd do anything to make my life easier. "You okay?" he asked after the waiter left. "Yeah, I'm fine. I just hate making a fuss," I replied, folding my napkin on my lap. "You're not making a fuss. You're making sure you don't, die," he said, half joking, half serious. I laughed, a short, grateful sound. Well, when you put it that way. After dinner, as we walked under the clear night sky, I felt light, happy. That's when my phone buzzed with a text from Jane. Her words were like a cloud over the moon, darkening the moment. "Be careful, Liz. Not everyone takes your condition seriously. Wouldn't want anything to happen to you." I read the text to Alex, who wrapped an arm around me, pulling me close. "She's just trying to get to you," he said. But as much as I wanted to shrug it off, I couldn't shake the feeling that Jane's message was more than just a jab. It was a warning, a reminder that my allergy made me vulnerable, not just to food, but to people like her, who saw it as a weakness to be exploited. The rest of the walk home, I couldn't help but think about all the close calls, all the accidental exposures, and how easily something could go wrong. It wasn't just the peanuts, or the soy, or the peas. It was the realization that my allergy was more than a personal battle. It was a chink in my armor that someone like Jane could see as an opportunity. And that thought was scarier than any allergic reaction I'd ever had. Dinners at Jane's house were always a production, like a play where everyone knew their parts except me. I was the wild card, the one who could unintentionally cause a scene with a single bite. Alex tried to make it better, but there's only so much you can do when you're playing in someone else's home court. One particular evening, the tension was as thick as the gravy on the table. Jane was bustling around, placing dish after dish on the table. I sat there, my own plate empty, waiting to figure out what I could eat without a trip to the hospital. "Alex, darling, pass the green beans to Liz. They're just divine," Jane said, her voice dripping with a sweetness that didn't reach her eyes. I eyed the beans, but something seemed off. "What's in them?" I asked. "Oh, just a touch of almond slivers for crunch," she said, waving a hand dismissively. I put my hand up, stopping Alex's reach. "I can't eat those, remember? Almonds are a no-go for me." Jane feigned surprise, a hand to her chest. "Oh dear, I must have forgotten. Silly me." Alex's chair scraped back as he stood up. "Mom, this is serious. Liz could end up in the hospital." His voice was firm, edged with a frustration that made Jane's eyes narrow just a little. "I just wanted to make something nice," she said. "It's not my fault Liz has all these allergies." The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. The other relatives glanced around, forks paused midair, not sure where to look. I felt a flush creeping up my neck, embarrassed by the spotlight. Alex's dad, Mark, tried to break the tension. "Let's just enjoy the meal, shall we? There's plenty Liz can eat." But the damage was done. The rest of the dinner passed in strained politeness, with Jane asking pointed questions about my allergies, as if she were taking notes for next time. Later, when Alex and I were alone, he apologized. "I'm sorry, Liz. I should have double-checked everything before we came." I shook my head, tired of feeling like a problem to be managed. "It's not your fault, but I'm starting to think your mom does these things on purpose." He didn't answer, and he didn't need to. We both knew the truth. Jane was serving up a side of malice with every meal, and I was the main course. I could always tell when Jane had been working on Alex. He'd get this distant look in his eyes, like he was seeing me, but also seeing through me, weighing her words against his own judgment. This particular evening, it was like a cloud had settled over him, and I knew it before he even said a word. "Mom thinks we should consider..." Well, she thinks we might not be thinking about the future enough, Alex muttered, not meeting my eye as he fumbled with the TV remote. "The future?" I asked, a sinking feeling in my gut. "Yeah, kids and your health issues," he continued, the word issues hanging awkwardly in the air between us. I felt a tightness in my chest. "She talked to you about my allergies again, didn't she?" He sighed, setting the remote down. "She's just worried, Liz. She thinks it's a lot for us to handle, especially if we want a family." I bristled. "We've talked about this. I've managed so far, haven't I? And there are plenty of people with allergies who have kids." Alex ran a hand through his hair, a sure sign he was stressed. I know, it's just... She has this way of making me doubt things." The room was quiet for a moment, the tension thick. I watched him, this man I loved, wrestling with the seeds of doubt his mother had planted. "Alex, do you doubt us?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "No." He looked up, finally, his eyes clear and firm. "No, I don't. I just hate that she keeps bringing it up. I hate that it makes us fight." I reached for his hand, our fingers intertwining. "We're not fighting. We're on the same side, remember?" He nodded, pulling me into a hug. "You and me against the world, right?" "Right," I said, but as I held him, I couldn't shake the feeling that Jane's words were like weeds, threatening to grow wild and choke the life out of the beautiful thing we had. And I knew then that it wasn't just my allergies that needed managing. It was the doubts that could seep into the cracks of even the strongest relationships. The news of my pregnancy came as a surprise, a happy one for Alex and me, a complicated one for everyone else. The day we announced it to his parents, Jane's reaction was like watching a robot trying to mimic human emotions. A pause, then a smile that didn't quite match the situation. "We're going to have a baby, Mom," Alex said, his voice a mix of pride and caution as he gauged his mother's reaction. "That's wonderful," Jane managed to say, the words sounding foreign in her mouth. "We must have a family dinner to celebrate." I was skeptical. Celebrations at Jane's were never just celebrations, but I saw the hopeful look in Alex's eyes and agreed. The night of the dinner, the house was buzzing with relatives. Jane was the perfect hostess, floating from guest to guest with a grace that felt almost genuine. When she reached us, her smile was practiced. "Congratulations, Liz," she said. "This is such a joyous occasion." "Thank you, Jane," I replied, trying to match her formality. "We're excited." Alex wrapped his arm around my waist, a silent thank you for playing along. As dinner approached, I felt the familiar anxiety. A table full of food was a minefield for me, but tonight, I hoped, would be different. The table was a feast, dishes upon dishes laid out, and I felt every eye on me as I hesitated, my hand hovering over the options. "Go on, dear," Jane urged. "Eat up. You're eating for two now." I smiled weakly, choosing the safest options, vegetables and rice, plain and simple. But as I reached for a slice of bread, Jane stopped me. "Actually, maybe not that one," she said quickly. "I'm not sure if the baker used soy flour." I paused, bread in hand, and met her gaze. There was a flicker of something there. Concern, or was it a challenge? "Thank you for letting me know," I said, putting the bread down. But the warning bells were already ringing in my head. How did she know about the soy flour? It seemed too close a call, too perfect a save. The rest of the meal passed in a blur, congratulations mingling with the clinking of glasses. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Jane's hospitality was a veneer, and beneath it lay a trap, set and waiting for just the right moment. The family dinner in honor of our future baby was nothing short of a banquet. Jane had outdone herself, and there was a spread that would make a Thanksgiving dinner look modest. But my stomach was in knots, not from hunger, but from fear. Every dish was a potential hazard, a hidden enemy that could send me to the hospital, or worse. As we all took our seats, the chatter around the table was lively, filled with the usual family gossip and stories. Jane was at the head of the table, presiding over the feast like a queen in her court. She called everyone to attention with a gentle tap of her glass. "Before we begin, I just want to say how thrilled we are to be celebrating Liz and Alex's upcoming addition to our family," Jane announced, her voice steady and clear. There was a round of hear, and applause. I forced a smile, feeling Alex squeeze my hand under the table. "Thank you, everyone," I said. "We're really looking forward to this new chapter in our lives." The meal began, and I tentatively picked at my food, choosing the simplest items. Alex watched me, his brow furrowed with concern. "You doing okay?" he asked quietly. "Yeah, just being careful," I replied, pushing a roasted potato around my plate. Jane's eyes were on me, and I felt like a specimen under a microscope. "Liz, you haven't touched your salad. The dressing is on the side, just as you like it," she said, her voice tinged with a forced cheerfulness. "Thank you, Jane. I'm just not much of an appetite tonight," I said, avoiding the salad that I knew could easily contain hidden allergens. As the dinner wore on, the tension grew. Every time Jane offered me something, my anxiety spiked. The room felt hot, the walls inching closer with each passing minute. Then came the cake. It was a beautiful confection, layers of sponge and cream that made the room ooh and ah. Jane cut a slice and handed it to me with a smile that might have been genuine if I hadn't known better. "For the mom-to-be," she said. I looked at the cake, then at Alex, then at Jane. "I really shouldn't," I said, "but it looks delicious." "Oh, come on, Liz. One little bite won't hurt. For the baby," Jane pressed, her voice sweet as the icing. That's when Alex's dad, Mark, stepped in, his hand swift as he knocked the plate from my hands. The cake tumbled to the floor, and a stunned silence fell over the room. "What the hell, Dad?" Alex exclaimed, his voice a mix of anger and confusion. Mark stood, his face pale but his voice firm. "I saw the label in the trash. That cake has peanut oil in it." The room erupted in chaos. Jane's face was the picture of shock, but her eyes gave her away. There was a flash of something there. Fear, maybe? Guilt? Alex stood, his chair clattering behind him. "Mom, did you know about this?" he demanded. Jane's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. And in that moment, the truth was as clear as the danger that had been on my plate. The room was dead silent after Mark's revelation, the dropped cake like a crime scene on the hardwood floor. Everyone's eyes were locked on Jane, who seemed to shrink under the collective gaze. "Mom, is it true? Did you know?" Alex's voice cut through the tension, sharp and demanding. Jane's eyes flickered with something dark before she regained her composure. "Of course not. I would never." Her voice trailed off, unconvincing. Mark wasn't having any of it. "I saw the shopping list, Jane. Peanut oil for cake. It was right there, in your handwriting," he said, his voice steady but laced with disappointment. The murmurs around the table grew louder, a mix of disbelief and anger bubbling up from the family. Alex was shaking his head, his hands balled into fists. "How could you, Mom? Liz could have died." I was frozen in my seat, the gravity of the situation anchoring me down. This wasn't just carelessness or forgetfulness, it was intentional. Jane's mask finally slipped, her face twisted in anger. "I didn't want it to come to this, but she's not right for you, Alex. She's weak, and now she's bringing a child into this world who will be just like her." Alex took a step toward his mother, incredulous. "Weak? Liz is the strongest person I know. And you? How could you be so cruel?" I could feel the eyes on me, waiting for me to break down, to crumble under the weight of Jane's words. But I didn't. "Jane," I said, my voice surprisingly calm, "you've made your feelings very clear. But this is not just about me. This is about a family, your grandchild." Jane looked away, her jaw clenched, and for the first time, I saw the hint of fear in her eyes. Maybe she realized that her actions hadn't just endangered me, but her relationship with her son, her reputation, everything. The rest of the evening was a blur. There were arguments, tears, and hushed conversations as the family tried to process what had happened. Alex and I left early, the weight of the evening heavy on our shoulders. We didn't speak much on the drive home. What was there to say? The truth was out, and with it, the facade of a polite, if not happy family was shattered, all because of a peanut. The drive home was quiet, the kind of silence that's heavy, filled with things unsaid. When we finally walked through our front door, Alex and I just stood there. the echo of the night's drama still ringing in our ears. Alex was the first to break the silence. "I can't believe my own mother would do something like that," he said, his voice hollow. I sat down on the couch, the cushion failing to comfort me. "I know, it's a lot to take in." He sat beside me, taking my hands in his. "I'm so sorry, Liz. It's unforgivable." I looked at him, seeing the pain in his eyes, and my heart ached. "It's not your fault, Alex. We couldn't have known she'd go this far." But the truth was there, hanging between us. Jane had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The family was in pieces. Some stood by us, shocked and appalled by Jane's actions, while others struggled to wrap their heads around the reality of the situation. The next few days were a whirlwind. Alex's phone buzzed constantly with messages and calls. Relatives wanted to express their shock, their support, their apologies. And through it all, there was a deafening silence from Jane. No apologies, no explanations, nothing. Alex finally broke the news to me a week later. "Dad's left her. He can't get past what she did. He said it's been a long time coming." I wasn't sure how to feel. Relief, sadness, pity? "And Jane?" I asked tentatively. "He said she's not handling it well. She's alone now," Alex replied, a twinge of something like regret in his tone. We sat in our living room, the walls we'd painted together, the furniture we'd picked out during countless trips to the store. It was our home, filled with our memories, our love. And outside, there was a storm brewing, one that threatened to uproot everything we knew. But in that moment, I realized that no matter what happened, we had each other. We were a team, about to bring a new life into the world, and that was what mattered. "I love you, Liz," Alex said, pulling me close. "I love you too," I whispered back. The fallout from that night would linger. The scars it left on our family would take time to heal. But as I looked at Alex, at the life we'd built, and the future we were about to embark on, I knew that we'd weather any storm together. And as for Jane, she was a chapter in our lives that we had closed, a story that we wouldn't let define us. From now on, it was just us, our baby, and the road ahead. Whatever it brought, we'd face it together.